I've been beta testing, okay, in the background. This is a top secret argument, okay? Top secret argument. But if anybody ever brings up the taxation is theft meme, I have the murder shot on that. I'm not even going to reveal it. The argument is so deadly, okay, that as soon as you hear it, you're going to be like, oh shit, that's the game changer argument. That's the game changer argument right there. Whew. Oh man. We'll see if it comes up. Is the response in the form of a question? Comos, yeah. I'm gonna get another one like that. Is como se dice here? Oh, okay. Here's my meme, I guess. I don't want to reveal this argument because I don't want anybody to be ready for it because I want to ambush somebody with it. If somebody were to tell me, right, okay, this is like my meme, silver killing bullet, that I want to see a good answer to. When somebody says taxation is theft, right? So if somebody says taxation is theft, and you know, you can do like the standard response, well, we need this to make a society run, blah, blah, blah. Like, why do you think taxation is theft? Like, well, because you don't consent to it. And it's like, well, you kind of do by living here. Well, you kind of have to, blah, blah, blah. All right. How about this? Okay. Yeah, you got it. Samplodolic. If somebody says taxation is theft, I want to respond with, well, I think labor is theft. How do you argue out of that position? I would be really curious to hear how somebody counters that. Because all the same arguments you can make for being forced to pay taxes and blah, 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 you can make for being forced to have to be a worker, right? Bring me and I'll debunk that shit. Exskillsme, chill, okay? Not right now. Business. Destiny is afraid. Yeah, I'm super afraid. Actually, fuck it. Get on fucking Discord. Why the fuck not? Tell me why it's wrong.
I know you said you will always just come in and do.
If you're upset that Exskillsme is coming
chill.
on, this is your guys' fault, okay? Because I've talked to so many goddamn fucking socialists and lefties that I need to. I'm so sorry. I hope you guys were upset. This is your fault. You've done this to me. And where the fuck did Exskillsme go? Did he get on Discord? But then I want like a cool light in the back. If I just like, if I take that light and I just diffuse like a really gentle like blue or green or purple, would that look really cool or is it gonna look really fucking stupid? Do you know how would that be?
I think it would be quite nice personally.
God damn it, who the fuck is that? Oh, you're so fucking dumb. I agree with you a little bit more on the Supreme Court thing though, but just a little bit more, okay? On the Democrats and Republicans both pushing back and forth on each other. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Wait, if you're talking, your microphone stopped working.
Oh, wait, can you hear me now?
Oh, yep, I can hear you now.
Yeah. Yeah, I was saying, yeah, understanding the background definitely adds a lot of context.
A little layer
yeah,
of
cool.
complexity, but okay, what's up? What's your response to the if taxation is theft, then labor is theft?
Well, before I give the response, I have to hear the construction. Why is it the case that labor is theft if taxation is theft?
I mean, I'm generally applying the same arguments. People seem to think that taxation is theft because money is being taken from them or something of value is being taken from them and they didn't necessarily consent to it. Like they're born in a state, they get a job, and then they just lose money and they don't want it to be taken from them. And it's done by force because the government will put you in jail and then kill you if you whatever. So it seems like you can make similar arguments for the value of your labor being extracted from you because you also don't have the ability to keep that from happening.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I'm actually really glad. The reason I jumped on this isn't because I'm married to the taxation is theft meme. It's because kind of what you just said about labor value being forcefully extracted from the labor force is such like a ubiquitous meme among the left that this is a pretty awesome opportunity to actually clear that up. Because you have
shit. Well, be careful. I know you're excited, but I don't actually believe that. But
well, that's your silver bullet, though. And even if you don't believe it, we can still talk about it.
Oh yeah, I'm just curious of what their response would be because I think that I'm not married to the idea that a capitalist is depriving his laborers of value by scraping money off the top of their work. I don't think that's I don't like that take, but.
Yeah. So the reason that take is wrong is basically the most fundamental law of economics. This was why, the economics profession basically didn't exist before the 18th century. There was no economics. And our understanding of how you acquired wealth, how a nation acquired wealth, was basically, the economics is a zero-sum game, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the idea was, if you want wealth, that means you have to stop wealth from leaving your country, as in like prevent trade. And secondly, you have to go and take it from other countries. And that led to colonization and all. But basically the fundamental insight that led to modern economics, promoted by Adam Smith, was that the actual act of trade creates value. When two people engage in a voluntary trade, both are better off than they were before the trade. So this kind of gets to the value of labor labor theory, because labor is a voluntary trade, and the Marxists.
I would take issue with that, but go ahead.
Yeah, well, it is a voluntary trade. What you're going to say is there are opportunity costs to not engage in that sort of trade, and that's true. But saying there are opportunity costs to decide not to engage in a sort of trade isn't the same thing as being forced to do that trade.
Yeah, kind of, but I think we can talk on this in degrees. So for instance, like I have just as much a decision if I want to walk across the street to go to a different restaurant as I do if I want to move slightly to avoid getting shot in the head. But I would argue that like the voluntariness of both of these things is very different, right? Because the opportunity cost attached to both is very different.
Yeah, but it's not a matter of the opportunity costs being different. It's a matter of the opportunity costs being the result of some actor with a gun versus the opportunity cost just being sort of like gravity. Like if you don't produce anything and you don't trade what you produce, then you can't consume. That's sort of a fundamental law of nature, so to speak, that you can't trade or you can't consume if you don't produce. So the idea that like, yeah, if you don't participate in the economy, that you're not going to be able to consume very much, that's an opportunity cost. That's not so much somebody actually forcing you down because you don't want to give up your labor. But I think that we can go back to this.
We can go into this a lot, but that's
we can go back to this. Yeah, but I think the more fundamental.
Oh, and then real quick, just to be fair, because I'm not trying to kill you or whatever. I did tell Mr. Man I'm playing games, so we have to keep this kind of short, okay? So
okay, that's fine with me. Yeah. So the other thing, and this is something I've heard you repeat a lot, and it's that basically capitalists extract surplus from labor. I've heard you repeat that like quite a bit, and leftists repeat this as well.
Kind of
like your impression of what that entails.
Yeah, so my idea, so the lefty explanation of this is that laborers get together and they produce some value, but they're robbed of some of that value via a capitalist. Somebody that owns a business takes value from them. The way that I view this transaction is you have laborers that aren't able to generate any value with their work, but then a capitalist provides the means to do so, and as in exchange for providing the means for them to earn some sort of money, the capitalist scrapes money off of their labor as well. So kind of as you said, like it's a transaction that benefits both parties is how I view it.
Yeah, and that's the key insight, and that's actually the reason it's true. That's why it's kind of like it's a half truth, right? Because the capitalist does earn surplus from the labor it hires. That's true, but that surplus is what incentivizes the transaction in the first place. Why would anybody hire somebody if they received no surplus from that transaction? If you receive no surplus, then you have no incentive to engage in the relationship. And the second key insight, and this is probably the more important one, is that the labor also receives surplus from the capitalists. And this is, getting back to the fundamental law of trade. That laborer, because he voluntarily agreed to do that, he is basically saying through his actions that he is better off engaging in that trade and receiving his income than he is in not doing that. So both sides receive a surplus. And that's the fundamental law of trade, is that when there's a voluntary trade, both sides receive surplus. And when you have an involuntary trade, then that's not necessarily the case. But that's a really fundamental. It's very important to understand that the laborer gets surplus too. The laborer gets more than what he puts in. And the capitalist also gets more than what he pays. And that's why the trade is beneficial, because both sides are better off than they were before.
Sure. I don't think anybody necessarily disagrees with this. Theoretically, I think that the haggling comes down into how much of a surplus is being provided by both sides, which is what so somebody would argue that while Amazon might provide some level of surplus to their employees, if you look at the wealth at some of the higher people in Amazon, like it's clear that there's much more scraping being done from the laborers than the capital owner. Whatever.
I'll say that sort of comparison is somewhat maybe beyond the scope of economics to a certain degree.
Well, it's a very morally loaded argument as well, right?
It's morally loaded, but I think I also kind of just fundamentally disagree. If you go to any single laborer who works at Amazon, and it's like, would your life be hurt more by abolishing this trade relationship you have? Would it hurt you more, or would it hurt Amazon more? And it's like, even if Amazon is getting most of the surplus, or the fact that I think we would both agree that the worker's life would be more impacted than Amazon would be by saying, no, you no longer work there out of nowhere, right?
Yeah, sure. And this is kind of I make similar arguments to this, where it's like, if some random Amazon employee were to start tweeting how much he loves Nazis on Twitter, it's not really going to have much impact on the company. Whereas if Jeff Bezos did it, it could theoretically like massively shift, stock prices in the entire company or something, right? like the
Yeah,
level of responsibility.
I guess
and
something
shared
like that.
Yeah.
But I guess my also like my point is that like laborers receive a very big surplus from like when they engage in that trade. That's why. And it's not exploitative. And I think the indications of this are the fact that, the labor market's pretty healthy, when recessions happen, and unemployment happens. But in the grand scheme of things, it seems like labor and productivity and wages, they seem to rise together. I know there's a big meme out there that wages aren't keeping up with productivity, but that's just a lie.
We can talk over that side, because I've read a lot arguing both sides where people disagree. Actually, and I think you've even linked something too. I've seen both sides go back and forth on that productivity versus labor quite a bit.
Yeah, they have gone back and forth, but I think if you understand the overall arguments of the back and forth, then that leads you kind of to the inescapable conclusion that that's not a true lie, or that's not a true fact. And I think the actual source of that is the EPI. And basically, if you look at how they measured it, the way they measured that was by basically excluding non-managerial wage growth. But the problem with that was that they compared the wage growth to a measure of productivity that did include those workers. So those numbers are fundamentally comparing apples and oranges. And if you read the link, they basically walk through that.
Yeah, but I thought but then people argue that there are reasons why these comparisons are made. In fact, we can talk about it specifically like at another time.
Yeah. But basically, what they say is that, we're trying to get the typical worker, so we don't want the managers involved in this. But the problem with that is your argument isn't really any longer that labor isn't keeping up with productivity. It's just that, productivity increases aren't happening in the lowest wage sectors, which is true. But that's not a problem of wages not keeping up with productivity. It's the opposite. It's a problem of wages tracking productivity too well, such that because frankly, if you look at the labor force, it's true that the low wage workers, especially, look at fast food restaurants, those jobs haven't changed very much in the past 20 years. So those jobs haven't really been the sectors responsible for the productivity growth. So it makes sense that the parts of the labor force that aren't responsible for the productivity growth aren't the ones that are seeing the wage growth either. There are interesting problems with that. There's no reason that has to be the case, but basically the actual overall problem is that wages are tracking productivity growth too well, and that they're actually giving the wage growth to the specific labor sectors that are responsible for the productivity growth, and not equally across the board.
Sure. And then I think we go back to that original thing where you're saying that there's a surplus given on both ends, where the capital provides something to the laborers as well. As the productivity of the capital increases, then a percentage surplus is necessarily going less and less to certain laborers that I guess people would want to see that surplus go to. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I understand kind of what you're saying. It's it's a bargaining power argument, right?
Let's say, for instance, there's one. So the argument that you're making is, let's say I've got 15 employees and one manager. Let's say that productivity is growing so much that a single manager can now take on 50 employees, or through some metric or whatever. Just because his productivity is growing doesn't necessarily mean that we would expect to see the labors increasing of the 50 workers now or whatever, right? But the problem is people would say, well, now those 50 laborers are generating more capital for the business because the business can spend less on labor for the manager or whatever, but they're not seeing a share of that at all, right?
Yeah, well, I think it's important to remember that capital increases the income of workers through their productivity. And I guess it's true that if the manager is the one who's being more productive, then he's going to get the wage growth. But I don't think it's a bargaining power issue, so to speak. And I think you hear monopsony, right? I think I've heard you mention that before.
Hear what? Say that again.
Monopsony.
What is monopsony?
So it's basically somewhat the inverse of a monopoly. So when you have a monopoly, you have a lot of buyers and very few suppliers, right?
Okay.
And that gives the suppliers a lot of bargaining power in the market, and they have a lot of power to set prices and set margins that they wouldn't have in a more competitive market. So monopsony is sort of the inverse in that there are actually not very many buyers and there are a lot of sellers. So this actually defines labor market, because in the labor market, the supply is actually the laborers and the buyers are the actual capitalists or the businesses.
Okay.
So people kind of use this theory. And I mentioned monopsony because I've heard you dub the labor market as a market failure because of an unequal bargaining power.
Yeah, it must be. It seems like it has to be the case.
But yeah, I challenge that. I don't think that's the case.
If that's true, then why is it that minimum wages seem to be positive in every place they're implemented?
I don't think that's true at all.
I mean, even in Seattle, they revised those studies to say that overall it's had a beneficial impact on the city.
No, That's not true. It depends on. It's really they didn't say overall beneficial impact. There are certain movements that they witnessed, but one of the movements they did was they observed the most inexperienced workers getting hurt the most in terms of their hours worked. But secondly, and more importantly, is that it's obviously with minimum wage.
Wait, real quick for what you just said. It hurt the lowest people by their hours worked. That was true, but I thought in that study it said even though they worked less hours, they were still making the same amount of money. Is that?
I don't think that's that. There are some segments, there are some definitions of workers. And I know I can remember this from the study. Maybe you want to look at it more.
Sure.
But basically the workers who had experience were the ones who saw the most benefit. And the ones who had no experience were the ones who actually received on net harm in terms of hours worked. So minimum wage was a case in Seattle where the benefits went to the experienced workers and the less experienced workers got the short end of the stick, which is often the case with minimum wage. But again, a more serious kind of issue with your statement that minimum wage always leads to good outcomes is the fact that minimum wage is always like a spurious correlation, right? And that we only humor big increases in minimum wage when the economy, we only humor big increases in minimum wage when the economy is doing well. And we don't do it when the economy is not doing well. So if you look at it as a policy, like as a basic, simple correlation, it seems like, oh yeah, look, every time we increase minimum wage, we see good labor, we can see good unemployment rate. Well, that's because you only increase the minimum wage when there is low unemployment rate. So I don't think that minimum wage is a good argument for why there's a market failure. It seems like the benefits are unequal and the consequences seem pretty, unintentional. But to a counterpoint to your minimum wage, the fact that, and I think you've mentioned this on stream before, the fact that larger companies pay their workers more than smaller companies. And that's a relationship that's completely opposite of what you would expect if we had this sort of market power, market failure. And kind of restate what I just said, when you have like giant companies tend to pay more than small mom and pop shops. So if we had this sort of like market failure that was being driven by market power on behalf of the buyers, which are the businesses in this case, then we wouldn't expect to see the big companies paying their workers more than smaller companies. We would expect it to be the opposite. So I think that's a pretty...
Well, I would have to unpack that a lot. I'm
question?
sorry, because there's a lot there. Like my instinct would be that larger companies would pay better than smaller companies because larger companies can do things more efficiently. I would think I would appeal to like economies of scale and whatnot here. That would be my first thought. But earlier you're saying because of what I believe about there being a market failure in setting wages, that smaller companies should pay more under my assumption there. Can you explain why I should think that?
Yeah, because and that's kind of why I brought it to monopsony, because that's what you were getting at. And I guess to kind of like start from more of a lower level, basically some economists support minimum wage, right? But
Well, it seems like most do. I would have to look up the polling.
No, I wouldn't say most. I mean, I would say most, I would say most support not abolishing it, but I wouldn't say most support rising it at a federal level to the level actually.
I don't like federal minimum wage. I think federal minimum wage is real stupid.
Right. I think a lot of economists think that as well.
Okay.
My point is that if you are going to justify the minimum wage on a economic theory grounds, usually monopsony is what they go to. Like that's the answer. It's like, oh, there must exist some level of monopsony power in the labor market. And that implies that, these companies have bargaining power over the suppliers in this case, which are the laborers. So that's kind of why I'm saying that power dynamics for your theory don't make sense with that pretty important data point. Whereas the companies with more market power pay their companies more than companies with less market power. So if wages were being set by this power dynamic, then we would expect it to be the opposite, but it's not the opposite. So that always and it's not just you making this argument, even economists make this argument that there's a monopsony, but it comes across to me as like, oh, we're trying to reach some conclusion. So we're saying, oh, there must be monopsony power, even though I think the conclusion has sort of come before the data. And
maybe you would have to weigh different parts here, and I can't do that. I don't have the background to do it.
Yeah. And I guess, we don't have to kind of go all the way into that.
Sure.
But
because there's like competing, because when you get into like competing economic factors, it would be disingenuous for me to pretend like I could accurately weigh it.
Yeah, I understand. But I guess the major takeaway though, and the takeaway to the leftists out there is that in a voluntary trade, and that's a emphasis on voluntary trade, both sides receive surplus value from the trade. Neither side is extracting surplus from the other. Both are receiving surplus. And if either side didn't receive surplus, then that side would have zero incentive to actually engage in the transaction.
I take somewhere between 19 and 17 issues with what you just said there, Exskillsme.
Very rarely do people start at the upper bound and go to the lower bound when they are
Yeah,
doing
I didn't think that was.
He was thinking of going even higher, but then he decided to tone it back.
Yeah.
Yeah, I realized I was overstepping at first. Why are we having this discussion with Exskillsme? All due respect to Exskillsme, but Exskillsme doesn't know shit about this. Why are we having this discussion?
You know what? Fucking go for it a little bit. Go ahead.
Wait, are you saying I don't know about labor economics? I mean, I only have a bachelor's in economics, so I'll grant you that. I don't claim to know a lot, but I think I know enough to know what I know and what I don't know. So I understand the arguments on both sides, but what I understand most is that you don't understand any of the arguments, Irishladdie.
Ooh, he got me. I mean, it's true. I don't have any degree in economics, but what I do know is that it is very possible for a voluntary trade to involve exploitation of one of the agents involved. That's like a hard fact right there. That's
Well,
like
it depends on how you define
blue.
exploitation. Depends on how you define exploitation. That you could define it in such a meaningless way that I would agree with it. It all depends on your definition of exploitation.
Okay, then let's bring it back to the simplest possible arguments, okay? You get marooned on a tiny island after your ship crashes in the middle of the Pacific. You find yourself an island with 2 trees. They produce coconuts. It's your only source of sustainable living. Someone already crashed, already lives there. They say they'll give you those coconuts if you suck their dick. Now, in this situation, you can engage in a voluntary trade to wrap your mouth around that meaty schlong and get that bread, okay? Totally valid. You can make that choice. But don't you think the initial setup, the circumstances into which both of these actors have been placed, involves just maybe a smidge of inherent exploitation?
So it's so leftist tactics to be on this fantasy desert island world. How about we go to the real world and look at how the conditions of workers have improved where capitalism and where free trade have flourished? You're on your dick-sucking desert island, but how about we have a discussion about the real world and about countries that have allowed laborers and allowed capitalists to engage freely in trade, and let's examine how the conditions of those workers have massively improved over time. And
do we want to talk about how real wages have kept up with inflation?
Yeah, we were just talking about that. Real wages absolutely have kept up with inflation.
Well, wait. Okay, because this is actually like this is the number one reason why I don't like the labor value theory shit or whatever, is like this particular topic. So before moving on to like the productivity or shit, can you reconcile like how voluntary is a laborer when they engage with a capitalist in terms of earning wages? How do you analyze this? I want to hear both of you. I know how Irishladdie does it, so go. Talk about this.
Are you asking for me?
Either of you. So basically, to lay out the basic premise, what Irishladdie is saying is that if I exist in a society and I can go out to 10 firms and work, to say that this is a voluntary transaction is ridiculous, because if I don't work, I'm going to die. So Irishladdie's argument is that this transaction can never be truly voluntary, that the capitalists have much more leverage than me. If I don't work for them, they could find another worker, but if I don't work, then I'm fucked. So yeah, so speak to that.
Yeah, so that's not exploitative because the opportunity costs aren't the result of some third party oppressing you. It's not somebody's fault if you don't get food and die. That's just the state of nature, right? So, but even kind of beyond that, the fact that laborers are voluntarily engaging in these transactions means that that's what among all opportunity costs they have, that's their best option. So I'm not so interested in saying what laborers should do. So my point, Irishladdie, to your analogy, isn't whether I think the person should engage in the trade or not engage in the trade. All I can do is conclude that they wanted the decision that they chose. And I think that's the important distinction between us, is that I believe in revealed preferences. I don't believe in saying, oh, workers shouldn't want to work for this or that. All I can do is observe the voluntary behavior of what workers decide to do and conclude that that was their best option among their alternatives. So that's
okay.
Key insight.
No, okay, and I completely accept the validity of that, let's say, analytical method. Here's how leftists work. Leftists are interested in the study of
Leftists don't work, Irishladdie. Go on.
All right, come on, let's chill. All right, good.
Leftists are interested in the study of power and social dynamics. And if you look at the decisions that play into a person's lifestyle, what type of job they decide to work, what career they go into, who they choose as a partner, all of these decisions, there's really no such thing as a voluntary choice, or at least not a choice completely free of outside influence. We are at all times susceptible to influences, some of which are explicitly coercive, some of which are implicitly so, which affect our decision making. My interest is not determining whether or not somebody does what they want to do. because people can want to do things that are nonetheless reflective of really shitty circumstances. A person who's working 2 jobs but can't afford to pay for their like kids fucking like high school binders and notebooks and shit, they can choose to work a 3rd job. That is their choice, and even if we pretend it's voluntary, it doesn't change the inherent immorality of a system which would require them to do so. I'm not interested in looking at people's decisions and asking why did they do that, and if it wasn't explicitly because someone held a gun to their head, it was a free choice. And
but that's your problem, Irishladdie. That's why your ideology will always fail, because if you don't ask why people aren't doing what they're doing, then you don't understand the situation.
No, but that's just one part of the equation.
Let me finish. What you don't see is that when a worker does something that you see to be the result of a super shitty situation, what you fail to realize is that they are selecting their best option among the alternatives. So you can say all day long how you hate that they have to have those alternatives, but those alternatives exist in the real world. So the fact that they're choosing the path that they believe maximizes their utility in the long run, you have to respect that, and you have to create a system that is conducive towards that sort of behavior.
Yeah, what an unbelievably reductive and defeatist way of analyzing social decisions.
It's not defeatist at all.
Okay, hold up, buddy. So they make a decision, and they made it in a vacuum, free choice. Okay,
no, why do they make that decision, Irish?
My friend. People make decisions, generally speaking, that optimize their personal interest. However, that applies. I'm going to need you to hold your mouth for just a moment, because that dichotomy applies equally to a free man in America today and to a slave to the Romans back 2,000 years ago. Everyone, regardless of the social situations into which they were born, regardless of the choices they have in front of them, make choices that will generally, no one's perfectly rational, optimize their livelihood, their well-being in the long term. That's generally something people are inclined to. That does nothing about the inherent immorality of the situation they're placed in.
I completely agree with you, Irishladdie, and that's why your system is always going to fail, because you live in a world where you expect this trade to happen in the absence of surplus.
I haven't even talked about my system.
Let me finish. What incentive do producers have to hire workers if they receive 0 surplus from those workers? Now, you just told me that you understand. Let me finish. You shut your mouth this time. Now, you just told me that you understand people act to maximize their own long-term well-being. I 100% agree with that. In fact, that's the critique I have with your ilk, is that you deny that. So you complain about capitalists receiving surplus from the workers they hire, but at the same time, how can you expect production to happen if
you
there's
realize
no surplus?
You're literally dialogue treeing me, right? I haven't even
wait.
gotten to talk.
Can I ask a question for Exskillsme then? But I think kind of gets to Irishladdie's point.
Probably won't take more than a minute from you.
Sorry, hold on. Okay. Okay. Fuck me. Oh my god, I can't talk and hear that at the same time. Okay, I'm sorry. Hold on. Okay, so Exskillsme, would you say that like a slave that's working for a slaver, would you say that that's like an okay transaction? Would you say that's an immoral transaction?
No, it's obviously an immoral transaction, because they're being...
So then what Irishladdie is kind of getting at is he's saying, let's say that you've got somebody that's a slave to somebody else, and then let's say that you've got like a laborer to somebody else. Both of these people are making the choices, that the freest choice they can make to optimize their situation and whatnot. What makes the slave thing immoral and the labor thing moral?
I would define that as the opportunity costs are being externally applied in a coercive manner. So to kind of emphasize on that,
have a job.
But that's not, nobody is taking food out of your stomach. They're just not giving you food. There's a massive difference between those two. You don't have a right for people to come to you and to feed you.
Okay, wait. Can I ask?
Please let me finish my thought.
Okay.
You don't have a right for people to come and feed you. If you want to be fed, then you can have people come and feed you. But the difference there is that if you're a slave, then your opportunity costs are being externally enforced by a slave driver. So, but in the real world, where it's like, if you don't work, then you starve. That's not anybody coming and shooting you if you don't engage in that trade. That's just a natural outcome of you deciding to defer from that trade. Slavery, there's no such opportunity cost naturally from deferring to being a slave.
Wait, that's absolutely not true. Slaves do get benefits from owners. They're provided.
I never said they didn't get benefits. I said that the opportunity costs of their decision to act as a slave are exogenous. They're being enforced, and they only exist because of coercion on behalf of a human actor.
Answer me this. What is the difference between a system in which a person can voluntarily induct themselves into indentured servitude for a pittance? They'll be provided food, they'll be provided shelter, minimal standards, obviously, but nonetheless, they'll be provided what they need to live. And they enter into this agreement voluntarily because they need to settle a down payment that was made to bring their family over to the new world. What is the difference between that system and working any job today, apart from the severity of
can I ask a question? Can I ask a question? Because you can talk about all of this for a lot, right? What Exskillsme is going to say is that an externally introduced punishment is different than somebody that's actually doing it. So this like very fundamentally gets into a doing versus allowing harm. So here's a question. Let's say that there's like a river of fire coming towards me, okay? And then both of you can answer this, and I think we'll see the differences in what you think, right? Let's say there's a river of fire coming towards you. In one scenario, you can work a job for somebody, and you'll move away from the river fire. They'll move you out of the river fire. Let's say in the other example, you have the choice of working with somebody, but if you don't, they themselves will unleash a river fire on you to kill you. Would you say that these two scenarios are fundamentally different? Does that example make sense? Irishladdie and Exskillsme?
They're literally identical.
So yeah, okay. So Irishladdie thinks that they're identical, but Exskillsme, you would say that these are very different, right?
Yeah, of course they're obviously different. To even begin, to say they're identical is already kind of patently false.
Well,
to even say that the conclusion is kind of the same, you would have to argue for a duty for care, basically.
Yeah. So
you can't say they're objectively.
Well, real
false.
quick, no, it's not false because you guys are. This is a philosophical discussion, okay? You guys are talking about.
I want to skip the philosophy.
No, you can't because this is literally what you're disagreeing on. You're disagreeing on. You're on a doing versus allowing harm. Is like literally what you guys are disagreeing over. Like you have to talk about that.
No, let me discuss Irishladdie's question first, because I wanted to say this when he said this, but if you notice, Irishladdie backpedaled immediately from slavery to indentured servitude.
I'll stand for both. I'm just trying to make the examples simpler so you can understand them. But please, by all means.
Indentured servitude isn't a more simple example than slavery. Indentured servitude is just actually more analogous to the sort of labor relationship that exists. That's why you retreated to it. It wasn't about simplicity or complexity. Don't lie.
You want to go back to slavery?
Of course, or we can, because indentured servitude, the idea of, if you have a debt and you work to pay off that debt, is that involuntary? It's like, well, you're working to pay off your debt. That's fundamentally different than slavery, which you brought up. So you were the one who switched from slavery to indentured servitude because you understood my takedown.
No, because I switched arguments. That doesn't mean I backed off the previous position. Yeah. You fucking dialogue treed me into talking about theory of labor value when I was just talking about the fundamental uselessness of your way of analyzing economic transactions. I would like to, if we may, get back to the original discussion here, to which the point that I never finished was this, simply. Both of us acknowledge that people generally act in their own best interests. Both of us understand that people should be allowed to act in their own best interests. That's a powerful social and economic motivator that we shouldn't infringe upon. However, your system, your way of looking at things is utterly agnostic to pre-existing systems of oppression. My system is interested primarily in dismantling an oppression, in assisting people in making free choices, free to their own agency, free of bigotry, of oppression, of coercion. My system is interested in making life better for people, and your system is about excusing how the system exists currently.
Look at any society where the masses has been pulled out of the kind of oppressive systems and the grinding poverty that you describe. Any society, any case in recorded history, and in any of those countries, they have largely escaped from the kinds of conditions that you describe with capitalism and largely free trade. And we see the opposite. We see more oppression, we see more despair, more poverty when countries depart from that, when they embrace socialism, when they embrace leftism, or they don't embrace free trade. This is a
fucking Venezuela argument. I'm talking philosophy, and you're like socialism hasn't worked.
Venezuela is one example. My point is, you claim to care about oppression, but the fact of the matter is that the capitalist system has been the best by far system of liberating people from oppression in human history.
I agree with that. Generally speaking, liberalism has been, I wouldn't call it a success. I'd say it preferable to feudalism. I mean, we've made a step forward. I'm not arguing against that point. I'm saying we can do better. Quit dialogue treeing me, dude. At no point have I said capitalism is fundamental.
Stop complaining about dialoguing tree. If you have an argument,
because it's what conservatives do. And I've been making arguments, and then you literally just did the Venezuela argument.
You just told me that I don't care about oppression and that I don't care about improving workers. My argument is that capitalism is best for what you claim to care about. I'm not dialoguing treating you. I'm taking the values that you are telling me you believe in, and I'm telling you that capitalism achieves those values better than your own ideology does. Empirically.
Ideology. Do you even know what kind of leftist I am? I know you're a capitalist.
Well, I have an interesting mention from you where you say that I have all of the bullet attracting characteristics of a human. Do you remember saying that about me?
Yes, I stand by.
To be clear, so to be clear as chat, Irishladdie has basically said he would give me the bullet in his real world. So while he's here whining about me dialoguing treating him, we're coming into this with him basically saying he would kill me under his political system.
Okay, okay. All right, okay. For one, I didn't say I would do it. I'm lazy, okay? Let's not assign that responsibility to me. But would you be killed generally? Ooh, I don't know. You make a solid case every time you open your mouth. Yeah, I'm not ashamed of that statement at all.
Right, but here's the problem is that I'm having a serious discussion here. I really believe capitalism is the best system for what you claim to care about. And here you are saying people like me get murdered. Like, why would I...
We've gotten pretty non sequitur now, okay? Chill.
It's not a non sequitur. He says I don't understand his ideology now, but he's advocated for actually having me murdered. So
but if his ideology would say that people like you are exploitive to such a level that it's enforcing inherently immoral applications onto society or whatever, then I mean his thing would logically follow. Right?
Like don't say that like I'm strawmanning his worldview when his worldview includes the execution of me. So don't I have some right to automatically
you haven't strawmanned me in that regard. No, I expect you to act in your own personal interest, which is to defend capitalism to your dying breath. I don't fault you for that. But what I do fault you for, however, is acting as though you're mounting the substantive critique of my ideology when we haven't even begun to discuss what sort of alternatives I would offer to the problems posed by capitalism.
Well, I know what entails killing me. So what else would you after you kill me?
No,
what would happen, Irish
killing you would be for fun. Okay.
Yeah. So what happens after I get murdered?
I'm sorry. You're right. I should tone it down. For efficacy, all right. Let's dial it back a bit. You know what? We can roll it back a little bit, okay? So here's a problem I think exists. I don't think people get to make free decisions, free of coercion decisions when it comes to choosing what job they'd like to work. I think there are factors like insubstantial pay, a lack of public transportation, an inability to negotiate your wages with your boss, and a variety of other things.
Wait, I'm not trying to cut you off, but like Exskillsme might agree with every single point you're going to say, but he'll just say that the penalty isn't being put on you by any of these actual capitalists, so it's not their concern. That's where the primary disagreement was.
Well, that's what I'm getting to, because I'm concerned about these things, and I don't think they can be addressed from within the system. And this may be a contentious point, but if we look at the history of capitalism in Western society, we can see many examples of businesses going way the fuck overboard with the exploitation of workers if the government or any other publicly accountable entity is not there to rein them in. That's a thing that happens. And I don't even think that's a huge mark against capitalism conceptually. What I do think it is an indication that there's room for improvement. And that improvement cannot be, oh, well, people are making free choices in the system that can make it freely, so it's not a problem. Why do you have a problem with free choice? Because that's a super reductive and nihilistic way of addressing the problems we face in our society today.
You haven't said anything. You haven't said anything at all. All you've done is describe some extremely broad issues that you have with the current system and said there's room for improvement. So please stop these platitudes and just say what you think is what you think is better.
Okay, can we agree on one thing, though? Just one thing. Because this is important. I'm not trying to posture.
What?
Do you think it is possible that there are problems within capitalism that cannot be addressed through market forces that are severe enough that might warrant a sort of extra systemic approach towards correcting them?
Of course, market failures exist, and there's absolutely room for government to act as an umpire in the economy, especially in those cases.
Okay,
of course.
Okay, cool. All right. Okay, cool. Then we agree on that. That's really important.
Although be careful, just to make sure you agree, Exskillsme, I'm pretty sure, is saying that he thinks that these things can still be, which is my argument, I still think these things can be addressed within the paradigm of capitalism. This doesn't require a total paradigm shift.
Irishladdie hasn't even ventured into saying we should reject the
paradigm. Yeah, I just want
for him to do that.
I just want to make sure that you're both on the same page, because I don't know if Irishladdie thinks he just got you to admit that you could use non-capitalist things.
No, I could never get Exskillsme to change his mind.
Okay, yeah, all right, just making sure. All right, so what's a change, Irishladdie, then that you would like to see done, like extra capitalism outside of this that can't be done within capitalism?
I mean, fuck. Okay, how radical do I go? Do I talk about the abolition of capital? Do I talk about public subsidization of workplaces? Or do I talk about?
Ooh, how about a relevant thing that we spoke about recently? You're a big fan of the decommodization of housing. There's a word in there. To decommodify housing. I don't know what.
Fuck, I'm slipping on it too. When we briefly touched on rent control?
Well, so you believe, for instance, that people owning not just all capital, but especially like housing, that having owners of housing that rent it out, that use housing as capital, that's like fundamentally bad.
Oh yes, absolutely. Okay, yes. Sorry, I was a little bit confused on the specifics there. Okay, yeah, no, I'd absolutely love to discuss this. So, as some of you are aware, probably those of you who live on either of the coasts of the America, housing's a bit of a pissing state right now. It's not particularly good. Some housing costs in some cities are extravagantly high, and what's more, these housing costs are being
okay. Get to the. Let's go. What would you do differently?
Okay, some folks and some corporations buy up large swaths of housing, up them, and gentrify a neighborhood, increasing the cost of rent and pushing out people who live there privately or who lived there previously. I think this can be addressed by. Okay. Now, I know this is a contentious subject, but I've been doing some research over the past few days. There are some rent control initiatives that I would be in support of because I think the externalities caused by the implementation of those systems can be addressed by a responsible policymakers.
Bring Dan in here. No, just kidding. We've already done this rent control thing to death. You suck. I might even force you to die on that hill because rent control is such a dumb hill to die on. So I'm not even gonna I'm gonna do you a huge favor and say, don't argue rent control. So you're welcome.
Wow, thanks, man. Okay, wow. I've I learned a lot from that little tidbit. Fuck. Okay.
Let's get to the central idea. Is that you think that housing shouldn't be owned by a capitalist? They should be owned by the state or something, right? Like what's?
Let me talk because Irishladdie, you've talked for a long time.
But he hasn't given any examples of what he wants to change.
But my question though is with I'm talking about the paradigm. Like my assertion is that the paradigm of capitalism is best for alleviating poverty, is best for pulling the masses out of oppressive systems. And Irishladdie rejects that. So that's kind of the fundamental question that I'm trying to get at, is why do you theoretically believe? Do you think that the Marxian view that capitalism was useful for it was now, but now we need to move on past that? What's your actual
yeah, I absolutely believe that. Capitalism has been enormously helpful through the Industrial Revolution. There's a time, however, when all things must come to an end, as one day socialism will too. I think we've reached that point in capitalism.
So the problem I've always had with that argument is that you see this a lot with if you look at late stage capitalism, for example, people have this weird notion that we're in the late stages of capitalism. Whereas in my mind, it's totally opposite. The only reason that you think we're in the late stages of capitalism is because you're alive here and now. In the grand scheme of things, there's still an insanely massive opportunity for capitalism to proliferate among developing countries and to lift their masses out of poverty. So the idea that we're already at the stage where we can ascend to post-capitalist society, well, what's going to happen with all the undeveloped markets? Are we expected to allow them to develop without the robust?
We wouldn't have a global revolution. We would have a revolution in an industrialized country. I would never suggest India is ready for a socialist.
Right, but you understand the problem you have, though, is that if you do that revolution in the United States and in Europe, then you fuck over capital markets. So how is India supposed to develop if international capital markets don't exist? Because you've decided. Here's the thing. Your view is fundamentally Eurocentric because you think our society is ready for socialism. You're ready for the revolution to come and dismantle capitalism. The reality is that throughout most of the world, they need the capitalism, the international free trade, the capital markets to even begin to humor your fantasy of post-capitalism.
I strongly disagree with that. Okay, there are so many things you're failing to consider here. For one, it is not impossible for these nations to develop under a capitalist system without the assistance or without the existence of America as a strong trading partner. For two, a socialist America would still export goods. It's not as though these markets would disappear. We're not talking about a completely internalized, insular
capital markets. You know what a capital market is?
I'm aware of what a capital market is.
So when you abolish capital, then what are you left with?
I never said abolishing.
I think
capital.
Under a socialist system
I'm not
where
arguing for a communist revolution.
Wait, why can you explain this? Let's say that we have a system where all of the factories are no longer owned by capitalists but are owned by laborers and whatnot. Why could they still not organize systems to trade with other countries? Why is that not possible?
Well, we're talking about abolishing capital, right?
Sure.
A massive component of international trade is
not necessarily.
Let me finish. And when people think of international trade, they think of trading goods and services. That's important, but that's also only one side of the equation. On the other side of the equation, you have foreign investment. And investment in capital is fundamentally a capitalist game. Is that you're actually investing ownership to have a financial interest in that. So for these developing countries, foreign investment and movement of capital in and out is super important. So when we collectivize and when we don't have capital, then how?
When you collectivize, don't you still have capital? It's just shared by all the workers, or is that not possible?
You don't have capital markets, because capital markets, what's key about capital markets is basically interest rates are the signal there for risk and time preference. So my point is that if you moved on the U.S. and all of these European countries to a socialist system, you screw over the entire landscape of international trade.
Listen, I acknowledge the fact.
Do you know who that's going to hurt most? It's going to hurt most minorities. Okay. It's going to hurt.
Okay.
Go, Irishladdie, go.
I acknowledge the fact that a socialist revolution, that a transfer in the ownership of the means production in America would upheave global trade to a substantial extent. I do not think some quippy argument about capital markets and interest rates is a sufficient justification to prevent an ethically mandatory social transition for some 360 million people. I don't think you can't just go like, oh yeah, India relies on our trade, you're fucking them over. For one, that is a massive simplification of the position that India has both domestically and in the global.
Just get A1 world government.
Capitalism has had at best a contentious effect on the third world, on the developing world. Here's
a factual question for you. How many people escaped poverty worldwide since the 1980s?
For one, what determines poverty is extremely subjective and usually defined by capitalists.
Could you use China as an argument for that, Exskillsme? Hasn't China's government been mainly like a single party, like ruling over things that isn't as much like free market and whatnot? Isn't that a lot of planned economy stuff? And
actually, the opposite. China and India, for that matter, are both instances where they started with this Irishladdie ideal of a socially oriented economy that failed. They moved on to a capitalist system, and now they're seeing tremendous growth. And the answer to the question, yes.
Increase in GDP does not mean society in general is moving forward.
What was I going to say?
You said that China switched to other things.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the answer to my question is that 1 billion people, that's billion with a B, have escaped poverty. But yes, you're right. The definition of poverty is arbitrary, obviously. But we've seen a tangible improvement in the lives of 1 billion people worldwide since the 1980s. If you claim to care about global poverty, you would be hailing this as the greatest achievement mankind has ever made. And maybe it actually is. I would agree with that.
I have talked multiple times about how capitalism has done a tremendous amount of work to escalate.
Right, but here's the problem I have now is that it's only Western, frankly, white countries, and that's not true, Asian countries as well, where capitalism really has reached the sort of steady state. We're very developed, we have a good standard of living. So you're saying we're all of a sudden ready to ascend to our socialist paradise. My problem is that you're taking away the opportunity for these developing economies to thrive in the same international markets that is currently lifting billions of people out of poverty over.
Okay, you have absolutely no evidence to suggest that America's gradual, and I'm not even talking about a departure here. I'm advocating for socialism. You realize there will still be businesses that will still be exporting goods. You realize there will still be interest rates. You realize that there will still be like the Fed that'll be.
How is an interest rate set if there's no capital ownership? If there's no private ownership of capital. How can you possibly set an interest rate?
Because you can have publicly owned banks that set.
That. You can set an interest rate. AKA, I could just say, okay, interest rate is 5%, and that's how it's organized in your society. The problem is these capital markets aren't healthy, because when you just arbitrarily set interest rates, that's totally
be as arbitrary as it is now.
No, what are you now interest rates? No, now interest rates are a function of investor risk preference. They're indications of so much more. If you just said, okay, we don't have private ownership, so we don't need investors, but we'll still invest, so we'll just set arbitrary levels of interest rates. You're creating a totally different system.
Listen, for one, your flatly wrong. We have moved the goalposts so many times. Initially, this was America's glorious ascension to communism will ruin capitalism for the rest of the world.
Obviously it will.
And
of course it will.
And now, we have.
Do you even deny that? Wait,
buddy.
do you deny that?
My friend, Exskillsme.
Wait, let Irish finish his sentence. And now what? We've gone from that.
Back to that though. So
yeah.
And now we have transitioned to a publicly owned means of production in America would have a system by which we were not able to set interest rates to the degree of specificity and contextual like validity that would be necessary to maintain our position in global trade. Listen, I'm gonna be perfectly honest with you. I'm not an economics major, and I cannot respond to arguments that deal with that level of fidelity. I strongly suspect they're bullshit, and I confess this, I do not have the education nor the background to directly contest them. But I will say this, and I would like to close this, or no, actually, you can rebut all the fuck you want when I'm done, but I do need to say this. It is very frustrating. Stephen has said many times he hates arguing with socialists because he has to argue the nitty-gritties of capitalism against the idyllic paradise in the imagined minds of the socialist. But in practice, I often find the opposite takes place, where capitalism now exists as the most precarious fucking deck of cards house, one that spans miles, and even the slightest shuddering on one side could precipitously collapse the entire system, an incredibly complicated system built up by millions over the course of centuries. And now I, advocating there are problems with the system, maybe we can improve, I now have to justify every fucking Jenga piece that might get pulled out in the process of advocating for and implementing a new system. Do we realize that's an unfair expectation to place? When we still lived in a feudalist society and people started talking about free trade and economics and capitalism, how well do you think they would have responded to arguments that broke down every single constituent piece of how feudal society works and then applied that diaspora to what capitalism was imagined to be, and then ask them to justify every conceivable problem that might arise from the transition between those two systems? It would be impossible. Not only is it an impossible standard to meet, it is, in my mind, and I could be wrong here, intellectually dishonest. Because nobody...
Is the filibuster over yet?
I'm done after that because you know more about economics than I do. So
of course I do, Irishladdie. That was never up for debate. The problem I have with what you just said is that you're pretending like you're only advocating that things aren't perfect and there's room for improvement. Don't tell me that's what you're advocating for. By your own admission, you're advocating for a paradigm shift. A paradigm shift where the impacts are global, worldwide, and they're impacting mostly the people that you claim to care about. So don't tell me, I'm not an economist. I don't understand all the minutia of international markets and free trade. And so I don't have to talk about that. If you don't understand that, you have no business advocating for an upheaval of that paradigm shifting impact. None whatsoever. And it's immoral for you to advocate for it because, again, the most vulnerable people to your ideas aren't, well, maybe me because you really want to kill me, but they're not you and me. They're not our society. They're the developing world who haven't had the luxury of yet achieving the industrialization and the productive power of the capitalist free market system. You are jeopardizing their development because of your lofty ideas that you admit you don't understand. So thank you.
I feel like, I think that Irishladdie's problem is that what he's essentially saying is you're presenting him with a sort of nirvana fallacy, where it's not even necessarily Irishladdie's. It's not necessarily Irishladdie's lack of education. It's that literally no person could ever account for all of the possible fuck ups of such a paradigm shift.
But it's not even a possible fuck up. It's like, how is international trade gonna? How is that possibly going to be the same? And there's no response.
Well, it wouldn't be the same, but the contention would be that the situations right now are so dire that almost any paradigm shift.
But they're not dire. The world is better now than it ever has been.
Sure. But, yeah, I understand that this is what you think, but if you guys don't resolve this, you're talking past each other, right? Because Irishladdie clearly thinks that the situation is dire enough now to call for a paradigm shift.
Here's a problem I have with what you just said, Stephen. Okay. Irishladdie has acknowledged that capitalism has been extremely beneficial at lifting countries out of poverty. So what I'm saying is there's still a lot of countries in poverty. So if we ascend past capitalism in the developed world, don't we run the risk of fucking over developed countries?
Well, no, because Irishladdie is saying that the conditions that exist in capitalist countries right now are so dire that some level of risk is acceptable for that paradigm shift to occur.
Right, but you're risking the well-being of the developed world, basically.
Sure, but
And
he would say
you
that
don't
right.
know-
Or sorry, God.
No, not even. We're not risking the develop. For one, us transitioning to a publicly owned means of production and the admittedly
which has
fairly
never worked, by the way, ever, never a single
Okay,
time.
but that's a separate argument.
separate
right
argument,
now,
yeah,
we're
yeah.
arguing the effect that would have on international trade. Us transitioning from a so far, the only argument you've posed as to why publicly owned means of production would disrupt global trade is the change in the interest rates issued. I do not think
not
that
true
is
at all.
substantial enough to indicate that the entire rest of the developing world will collapse without the influence of American business
no
and their
interest rates.
optimal
Interest rates are an example of a metric that are fundamentally driven by private ownership. So that was my point, was that they're very important, but they're also driven, the market level and the optimal level is driven by engagement in private ownership of capital.
Okay,
so that was my point there. But
genius.
like you said, you're the one who's saying it's all about interest rates. It's obviously not about interest rates.
No, I'm not. You brought that up. That's the only argument you've brought against in terms of how we'd affect global trade.
I'm talking about a broader paradigm of trade. And you are admitting that you don't know how it would look if we ascend past capitalism in the developed world. You admit that.
I know how it would look in America.
But you don't know the impact it would have on international trade, and ergo the development trajectory of the most oppressed.
It's true. I don't have a full understanding of every field of knowledge ever. Now I can link you some literature that deals with the impact that a socialist revolution would have on global trade. I admit I haven't read all the literature, but if you're acting as though that literature doesn't exist, that all lefties are just like platitude spitting armchair sociologists, then you're flatly wrong. I confess this is a gap in my knowledge, but it's not the one that I came here to discuss. Because frankly, I don't buy the premise of your argument. A Western trade relies on the exploitation of the third world. Here's my zesty hypothetical. What if America dips into socialism, our presence in the global trading market diminishes because, admittedly, the GDP would probably drop if we went socialist. And consequentially, now that we're no longer exploiting the fuck out of the third world and using our combined corporate and government leverage to force lower wages on people that have to work fucking like slave wages in their sweatshops in India and Bangladesh and China.
Careful. Irishladdie, you're going to die so hard on this argument. Good luck.
No, I'm familiar with the common counter arguments here, and I'm well aware of the fact that these institutions are preferable to subsistence farming.
Yeah.
That does not mean they are preferable to where they could have been today if we had not muscled corporate interest into those countries to demand cheaper labor for our production. And you can't argue against that because you and I have no idea where they could have been.
Well, weren't there a lot of attempts before when a lot of these countries were protectionist, like under was it like Mao and China and shit, where they tried to like force different people to, and it was
India.
Okay.
Mao's
economy.
You've talked for a lot, Irishladdie. Let me get in the word. India is another example. Everybody knows China, but India you mentioned, and you don't know. Maybe you do know. India tried the Soviet-style socially developed economy. It's notorious in Indian history that like the head finance minister, the head economist of India said, don't talk to me about profits because that's immoral. And what happened was that India lagged behind the rest of Asia, the rest of East Asia, until they adopted the market system. So that's a problem I have with you, Irishladdie, is that you're saying
because markets are important for developing nations. Whoa.
Better. Well, if
markets are just straw man the shit out of me. I never said markets aren't important for developing nations. I said getting the fuck exploited out of you by vastly more powerful and economically influential Western nations is probably detrimental to your ability to build a solid standard of living.
So then answer me this. If we just said, okay, fine, we won't open any more factories in China or in India or in Cambodia or in Vietnam, we won't exploit you anymore. Is that better than the current arrangement?
I mean, there would need to be a very gradual and intelligently handled transition. Things like that have to be handled carefully.
Yes or no? Like, do you think it's better for us?
It's not a yes or no question. It depends on how it's handled. Yeah, it could go fucking horribly.
My point is that these countries are obviously better. You call it exploitation, but objectively, the countries are better off with these sorts of trade relationships.
No, they're better off than they were before. That doesn't mean they're better off from what they could have been. You
can say that about anything, Irish.
This is literally like
statement, what you just said.
This is like the fucking like conservative. Haha, blacks in America should be thanking us because we brought them over from that shithole Africa, and that is technically true. We did do that. But that
wait, without using dumb examples. Okay, so what Irishladdie is saying is like, let's say somebody comes to your table, you've got 2 giant turkeys, and somebody walks up and you give them like 1 slice of bread, and you have like an extra turkey that's literally going to waste, and then somebody's like, okay, well hold on, this deal is not good, and then you're like, well fuck you, you've got more than nothing, and the person's like, well I could have something way more, and you're like, well who cares, you can't look at that. I think that's kind of like what Irishladdie is pointing at, that like sure they've benefited from these sorts of arrangements, but just because they benefited from something doesn't necessarily mean there isn't something they could have benefited from more.
Right, but the problem I have, that doesn't necessarily mean there's something they couldn't have benefited more. Is just a meaningless statement. I could say that about anything. It's like, oh wow, that was like a really productive relationship.
Fine,
oh yeah,
fine.
but they could have produced for more.
Well, no. So like when we look at like exploitation,
how am I supposed to? How is that falsifiable? How am I supposed to rebut that? Like say, oh, it could have been better.
That's the problem. That's the problem. I'm not saying nothing. The problem with talking about these really broad, like global initiatives to change massive upheavals of society is that you don't always get these super specific policy points and numbers that you can back up your advocacy on. Sometimes you just have to sit down, hash out the philosophy, and think a bit. And this is what bothers me when I talk to people.
Eurocentric. The developing world doesn't have the luxury of doing that.
It's,
they need foreign investment. They need free trade. They need international trade.
Why didn't America need foreign investment when we were transitioning from a colony state into a fully fledged capitalist nation? Why didn't we need the kind of external support that these nations apparently will collapse?
First of all, it's not support; it's trade. Secondly, we absolutely
that's a kind of support. Don't be disingenuous.
No, trade is not support. Trade is bilaterally voluntary. That's why it works. Trade's not a sacrifice of one nation to the other. That's how you view it. How I view it is it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Okay, so how is trade? Okay, so do you disagree with the statement that the Western world and Western trade is predicated on the exploitation of third world workers or of developing world workers?
Obviously not, but again, it's like how you define.
Wait, you agree or disagree?
No, of course not. It's not exploitative. It's mutually how about this, Irishladdie? You say exploitative. I'm not as much interested in that because I don't know how you define.
I know you're not.
Wait, listen to my response. Listen to me. Let me finish. I'm not interested in whether or not it's exploitative because that just depends on whatever definition you use. What I'm interested in is, do you recognize that it's mutually beneficial?
No, I don't.
Okay, but you're
no, that's not true. He recognizes that it's Irishladdie would say that it was mutually beneficial, but there were other forms of engagement between both. Shut up, because he misspoke. Irishladdie would say that it was mutually beneficial. However, just because something is mutually beneficial doesn't mean there's not an alternative choice that could be even more beneficial to the other party involved. That even if sweatshops and whatnot do
let him speak for himself. Does he recognize that it's mutually beneficial?
This is whether or not it's mutually beneficial depends on what you recognize to be mutually beneficial. Because when I think of mutually beneficial, I think of an exchange free of coercion. When you think of mutually beneficial, you think of American corporations, sometimes backed with U.S. military aid, barging into countries and saying, yes, I will allow you to keep these assets of yours. We will not, impose our right to exert corporate control over these natural resources you have if you're willing to open up these factories and allow us to have workers work there for 3 cents an hour. Now, that may technically be beneficial. 3 cents an hour may be better for these workers than subsistence farming, and I acknowledge that in the most bland, platitudinal, worthless, ethically bankrupt way imaginable, but I do not consider that a free exchange. Not even fucking close. How can you... it's unfathomable to me that you're trying to pound this argument that I don't care about the third world when you are utterly devoid. You are not only devoid of empathy, you are contemptual of people who have been put on the other side of this equation. We enjoy so many benefits in this country that are extracted almost exclusively from our unwillingness to bring the rest of the world up to we are. You say America
that sounds like a very white man's burden argument.
Shut the fuck. No, it doesn't.
Oh, it does. Oh, we need to bring them to where we are.
I never said we do.
We need to
take our fucking hands off them.
No, it's a white man's burden argument.
No, it's the literal opposite. We need to take our hands off them and stop interfering in their national affairs because we fuck things up. We ruin it for them. It's insane to me that you can pretend to think otherwise. I know you're being dishonest right now. I've seen you talk with Steven before. I know you don't give a shit about being intellectually honest. You have an agenda to push, and you push it, and you do it with admirable consistency, and it is a characteristic I would like to see in more leftists. But do not look me in the eye over the internet. Don't look me in the microphone camera. Don't sit here and pretend to me that my desire to see America stop meddling in the affairs of foreign nations stems from some subtly racist.
Okay, you guys are like both virtue signaling to each other so fucking hard. It's making me cringe. Okay, what the problem is that you have to address Irishladdie. Everything you just said, Exskillsme doesn't disagree with on a value level. What he's saying is that his system comports to those values better than your system does. That's what. Of course,
and that's what I'm saying. Empirically, capitalism does way better at lifting people out of poverty. It does best at replacing oppressive systems with more democratic institutions across the board. Name me a country that is largely free.
Capitalists keep backing fascists in developing nations to prevent the scourge of communism from taking hold in the hearts of their workers.
Communism is an authoritarian system.
No. If you really think that we are like the promoters of democracy and free trade worldwide, why do we consistently assert the authority of authoritarians?
I'll give you a little bit here. You've talked a lot. Let me talk a bit. I do agree with you to a certain extent, whereas I don't think that we are like consciously trying to, or we shouldn't consciously try to deliver these values on other countries. In fact, I think that doesn't actually work when we try to do that. As an example, see Bush trying to bring democracy to Iraq. That's not an example of what I'm talking about when I'm mentioning how capitalist systems tend to lead to more free conditions over time. An example I'm talking about is actually a place like Chile. Now, this is a country where you would say the U.S. was the one who installed the fascists in order to stop communism in Chile, stop socialism in Chile, which is exactly what happened. There was an authoritarian dictatorship, lots of murders, thousands of disappearances. But the fact that there was a capitalist system and free trade created economic conditions in Chile such that they're now the most developed economy in South America. And what actually ended up happening was that sort of political freedom that you yearn for came as a result of the development and the institutions that were created as a result of capitalism. So what I'm saying is that I agree with you that capitalism doesn't necessarily mean that there's political freedom, but capitalism creates the conditions that tend to foster that sort of freedom that you came to declare about better than any other system.
I'm getting dialogue treat again. I never said that capitalism wasn't beneficial to establishing more freedom and more economic prosperity.
I'm saying it's the best paradigm. I'm saying it's the best paradigm, though, and you're saying it's not the best paradigm. So
it is the best paradigm for a particular period of time, usually accompanying.
Right, but the problem is we're not at that period of time yet because most of the world isn't even developed yet.
The whole world does not need to be ready for one nation to start vying for socialism.
Yeah, your view is Eurocentric, Irishladdie. You think we're ready because you live in a society
you have failed to prove your contention that America gradually transitioning to a socialist economy would collapse the world market. Your interest rates thing, and I apologize if
No, sorry.
Well, no, it's not that he's failed to prove it. It's that you guys apparently are I'm not trying to. This is a lit. I don't mean this like that. But you guys are unwilling to discuss it because Irishladdie's contention is that America shifting to a socialist system would destroy capital markets around the world, which would hinder the development of third world countries, which is why Irishladdie, or which is why Exskillsme is saying that your view is Eurocentric because you're not considering.
It's not just capital markets. It's not just interest rates. He's even admitted himself that they would hurt American GDP. Well, what do you think the impacts of GDP hurting on developing countries is going to be? We already see the impacts that when China's growth rate slows, that impacts our own stock market. So that's how intertwined.
Again, I ask you, if you're why do they need the benefit?
Here's my point, Irishladdie. Let me finish my point. My point is you acknowledge that your transition will harm GDP. But my contention is that that's obvious. That's like ipso facto admitting that we would harm international markets, given how intertwined.
So any social change, no matter how potentially beneficial, is automatically invalidated ethically if it also results in a lowering of the GDP. Is that seriously the argument you're making against me right now?
No, the argument I'm making is that if you acknowledge that your paradigm shift in the economy is going to obviously lead to lower GDP, you should be sensitive to the impacts that the lower GDP are going to have on developing nations. I think it's a very fair point. And you admitted that you don't really know the minutia of those arguments, but that's a concern to me.
Nobody on Earth fully understands the impact a socialist transition would have.
But that's why your view is Eurocentric, because you don't understand and you're not thinking about those issues. You're just hand-waving them.
Okay, all right, okay. Listen, talking to Exskillsme isn't going to serve me here, so I'm going to talk directly to chat.
Of course it's not.
No, wait, you can't. This doesn't just serve you guys to have a pulpit. What the fuck?
No, wait, no, Steven, you completely agree that sometimes it's important not to talk to the fascists, but to talk past the fascists.
I don't think he's. Yeah, I agree, but I don't think he's necessarily made a fascist argument yet.
No, he's not a fascist. But he'll enable them, and I mean, Dan was in chat saying that he would platform Richard Spencer over me. I mean, capitalists do side with fascists. You know that.
Yeah, but to be fair, you can't not expect that when you're talking about how you would have Dan and Exskillsme be killed, right? Wouldn't they? Isn't this why liberals side with fascists eventually? Is because you guys threaten to kill him?
No, we threaten to kill him because they side with fascists.
I don't know. Is this the cart or the horse? I'm not sure which one is going through first here.
Listen, chat. Okay, the issue pertaining to the how world trade would be impacted by America transitioning to a socialist economy is difficult and would require a tremendous amount of study. It is an unprecedented event, a nation of this size and power transitioning. However, this is the series of logical contentions Exskillsme would ask you to make. He would ask you to make that we not engage in any transition whatsoever, lest it carry the potential harm of disrupting free trade, which is evidently an attack on the developmental freedoms of the third world, in spite of the fact that it can be argued America has actually stifled the growth of the developing world by exploiting their lower wages and natural resources to ensure cheap labor for American businesses. It could be argued, in fact, that if America were to withdraw from these markets, there would be an initial shock to the global economy, but being free of external interference would allow these countries to begin to develop a more internally consistent economy, one which would not only allow but require them to start affording a more equitable wage for the workers that currently work at those factories.
But how are they? They have no
Unfortunately,
capital. How is it?
Unfortunately, yes, there is capital in India.
Foreign capital.
There is capital in India.
We're talking Africa. Africa needs capitalism more than anywhere else in the world, and you want to upheave the capitalist system worldwide. That's why you're fucking over.
I can't talk with you. I can't talk with you about this sniping one particular aspect of my argument, because the most frustrating part.
But the problem is, you're giving these huge speeches. You're not really saying anything. So
you argue that we can't transition until after the world has risen to a point in capitalism where they could survive our transition, but that would never happen because the Western world depends on the economic exploitation of the developing world. There will never be a fully ethical, developed capitalist economy in, say, India, because their lower wages are the only reason we have an interest in maintaining our overseas holds there. That's why we build our plants there. If they develop, we lose our ability to get cheap labor that leads to lowered costs in our country, and we have an economic crisis.
We lose access to the cheap labor, and they lose access to the jobs. So it's a loss. Both sides are worse off than they were before.
They can make their jobs.
But you're just saying that, Irishladdie. That's just empirically not true. If they could just make it, then why don't they just make it?
Wait. You're saying that India is fundamentally incapable of rising above like a 10 or 20% unemployment rate unless Americans are there to force them to work in factories for 6 cents an hour? You're saying that is the only stipulation by which India is capable of rising to the top, of joining us at the top of the world as a fully developed nation.
There's anybody who knows anything who would try to pretend that if India were all of a sudden cut off from those international trade and that foreign investment, because we're going to stop exploiting you. So here, we're not going to give you any more foreign investment. We're not going to open up any more jobs. I don't think there's a soul on earth who would think that 10 to 20% unemployment would be a lower bound. Actually, nobody thinks
we wouldn't completely withdraw from the market. We would just engage with it in an ethical way.
Here's the problem. You go back and forth, Irishladdie. You're accusing me of saying that we can't do any social changes unless we understand all these impacts. I'm talking on the grounds of a paradigm shift, which you
realize you're literally white man's.
Wait. Actually, can I hear? I'm curious. So, Irishladdie, you say that we would engage in a more ethical way. Can you give an example of that? What do you mean by that?
Yeah, okay. Now, I admit this isn't entirely my forte, but as it stands presently, by and large, the way in which we invest in developing nations is by exploiting really fucking cheap labor and attempting to get rights to some of the natural resources.
Yeah, I understand. I don't care about any of this. Can you tell me what you mean when you say engage in an ethical way?
Okay, so hypothetically, once America transitions to a socialist means of production, all that's really changed is who's getting the money and how it's being distributed, right?
I don't care about any of this. Wait a second. Can you
These are important foundational points because we still have that capital that we can invest internationally. What if there are ways in which we can invest into India comparable to the ways we've invested in, say, Latin American countries that have since developed to something approximating a developed nation, in the same way we invested in Eastern Europe, in the former Warsaw Pact nations, and even in some Middle Eastern nations, we can invest internationally in ways that aren't really fucked up and exploited.
I know, and I'm asking you, what are those ways?
Okay. I'm gonna spitball here. Would it not be possible for us to economically incentivize some larger businesses and firms in America to move to those countries?
Whitemansburden.com.
Wait, what do you mean by move to those?
Shut the fuck up. You just said they need us to write. Shut the fuck up.
Wait, no, wait. What do you mean by move to those countries? Can you finish your point?
Okay, sure. Amazon gets socialized. Bezos gets the bullet. We bring an Amazon campus over to, let's say, India, Myanmar, or whatever the fuck. We set up a campus over there. We invest in infrastructure. Now, this is something we can do as a society because we can determine where this money goes. It doesn't have to be for profit. We can set ourselves the fuck up here, institute local training programs and vocational schools that are meant to bring them. India already does pretty well with the tech stuff, but we can bring them onto.
How is this not white man's burden? We're going to bring them onto.
I'm gonna fucking kill myself. You're literally saying they need our sweatshops.
You're saying we should go to their countries and set up education programs so they can be on our level. You are describing like the white man's burden to a T. I'm saying
wait. Why can't you just own that and say sure, fuck it? Well, we want to decide that we want to help other countries. We realize that we have like a surplus of resources here, whatnot, and we will go into
white man's burden. Because white man's burden is not the same as helping other countries.
Well, but the fact that we're helping them is you're essentially saying that we have a burden to help other countries.
No. Okay, I'm sorry. I need to clarify this. White man's burden is a racialized term that suggests that it's the obligation of white men, the burden.
That's what you're suggesting right now, by the way.
To help the lesser minorities, the people who do not have the sensibility, the civilized notion to help themselves. Exskillsme has said that without our sweatshops, they are literally incapable of developing as a country. They need those sweatshops to rise. I'm saying they don't. They can get by on their own. But we've got a lot of money in this country. Might be nice to expand the net a little bit, bring some campuses over and help them and work with them in ways that do not force literal slave wages out of their work. There's not using this in a racialized context. I think they should be done in other places as well. I would love to see Greece brought up. I love their food, okay? I would love to see them brought up to a level that I think is appropriate for a Western European nation. Appropriate for every nation. But that doesn't mean we have to go into Greece and start instituting sweatshop labor. Oh, well, the wage is fucking 17 cents an hour. That's a hell of a lot better than unemployment, right? Yes. Is it what we should be doing? No. So I won't hear any more of that white man's burden argument from you, Exskillsme.
I mean, it's exactly what you described. We basically, when Steven asked you how we replace the current trade relationships we have and the capital investment we have, and you respond that we go and educate them and bring them to our level by opening up like local campuses and stuff. It sounds like an alien outreach, like where aliens come in like open up
we have some of our
to uplift humanity. That's what you're describing. I'm saying no, that doesn't work.
Move over there and spread the love around.
That sort of planning doesn't work. What does work is allowing people to economically engage in mutually beneficial transactions.
Yeah, you can.
I'm not even saying that from a moral point of view.
No, that's great. I'm so glad we agree.
Let me finish.
I'm so glad. Okay, you can finish, and then I'm going to tell you how much I care.
Okay. Why does Irish
the system that I'm talking about is objectively and empirically the one that is
we'll magically start helping others?
And you're the one advocating for a paradigm shift.
If and your
really
best replacement is we open up like education camps,
or sorry, not camps, campuses,
right?
Why
would people suddenly vote to do that under socialism?
That's your replacement.
Can you please explain to me how your argument that India needs our exploitative labor in order to develop
is any less a white man's? It's not my argument, Irishladdie. Everybody agrees. Everybody agrees that for the Eastern countries, and not even Eastern countries, it's the U.S. too. If the U.S. stopped trading with China, we would be fucked too. I'm not saying they need us or they need to come and open up campuses.
We're not going to stop trading with them. Socialist economies still trade. I don't know how many times I have to keep making these points.
Yeah, like which socialist countries trade? Hey, wait. Which ones, Irishladdie? Which socialist countries trade? Let me one.
I'm not arguing the efficacy of real life historical examples of socialism.
Because you can't.
Yeah, because listen, if you want to engage with the theory, do so. If you want to acknowledge the failures of past socialism, do so. But you need to quit. You need to quit
because the empirical evidence supports the capitalist system far better than any socialist.
Listen. You realize, for one, that trade did take place amongst socialist nations back in the time of the USSR. They just took place amongst socialist nations, not just because they shared common political interests, but also because their markets coincided well. But moreover than that, so for one,
they didn't trade internationally.
No, I literally just said that. Okay, so for one, the implementation of socialism in the USSR and their fucking satellite states was not one I would condone or support in America.
Okay, my point is, you're one example of a socialist country that did engage in trade internationally, actually like didn't by your own admission. So your one example is one where they didn't actually do that.
Dialogue train. You're jumping the fuck around. You're on fucking ice skates and you don't know how to stay straight. Can we focus on one point? For one, and I'm just issuing these as statements of fact. The assertion that India needs our sweatshops in order to develop economically is significantly more exploitative and patronizing than my assertion, which is that they can do fine on their own, but it would probably help them out if we found ways to redistribute some wealth and some corporate attention.
Real quick, can I temper it? Because this is a waste of time if we're not understanding each other. Let me temper your statement. So I don't think that Exskillsme is saying that these other countries need America. Obviously, anybody could survive or not survive. No, stop. He's not saying that. What he's saying is that their material conditions will be far worse without America's involvement, even if it's exploitative in the way that you deem it to be.
Okay, and how exactly is his assertion less white man's burden?
Wait, sorry. Let me also add to that. To the same extent, our material condition will be worse off if we stop with China. I'm not saying like we need China and the Chinese burden, the Chinese man burden sense. I'm not saying that at all. We all need healthy international trade. That's so important for development and for alleviating poverty. I'm saying. But if you agree, then you are advocating for a paradigm shift that will have impacts on this international market.
It will impact
you yourself don't understand them, and yet you still.
Okay, listen. No. This is so fucking dishonest. In Destiny, you have to recognize this. For one, nobody fully understands the impacts that a massive global upheaval like this would have.
Like fully, like every minutia. I'm like understanding. You don't even know the broad strokes of how. Like India is going to continue developing
how about we focus on the individual points that you have skated past? For one, okay, let's address
We can, but you're not allowed to talk for 10 minutes. So bring up a point I have it and I'll answer, but you're not going to talk for 10 minutes.
How is me saying it would be nice if socialist America invested in India more white man's burden than you saying India cannot development without our international investment as it stands today, which is largely
I'll answer you. First of all, Stephen kind of just said, when I say India needs international markets, I'm not saying they need us in the white man's burden. We all need. We need trade from India as well. It'll hurt us if we stop trading from India. So it's not just a matter.
I don't care about this answer.
Second of all, the reason why your proposal is more of a white man's burden is because you specifically used language like we're going to bring them up to our level, like by
economically,
by bringing like education campuses and stuff. That just seems so much more like we have a moral responsibility to uplift them.
This is stupid.
My system isn't saying no. We don't have like a moral responsibility to uplift anybody. Just let markets work.
Yeah, I'm aware of the fact that you don't feel responsibility.
Let me finish.
You don't need to tell me that.
My argument isn't we need to uplift other people. It's to let markets work, because markets empirically, especially on a global level, do an excellent job at improving the human condition overall. So I'm not advocating for actually going to a country and bringing them to our level, as you say it. I'm advocating just for letting markets work.
Okay. This was a stupid and dishonest argument. You realize that in both instances, we are talking about bringing trade and bringing economic investment over. You in the form of sweatshops, and me in the form of larger businesses, campuses, and educational, vocational facilities. In both instances, we are advocating for bringing wealth and attention over. And you realize the factory jobs we bring over there also have vocational programs attached to them, right?
Well, the difference, well, first of all, that's already happening in our capitalism. China engages, for instance, in a lot of educational programs with countries in Africa. But regardless of that, what Exskillsme is saying is that the difference is that in the argument that he's presenting, there is no white man's burden. Both sides are engaging in this activity because it's mutually beneficial. Countries aren't doing it because they feel some moral obligation to help out like a lesser country. They're doing it because it benefits both sides. He takes issue with your side because you're making it sound like there's a moral obligation where the Western country, the Eurocentric country, is superior to the inferior country, and that they have a moral burden to help a lesser country rise to the level of the greater one.
I literally never said that. You asked, how could we invest in India in a way that isn't through the exploitation of their cheap labor? And I provided an example. Didn't say they need it. just said it might be nice to bring wealth over there. They need it a little bit more than we do. That's not a white man's burdeny statement for a wealthier
100%
country.
is.
This is
It
why I
absolutely
can't
is,
argue
dude.
with people like Exskillsme, because he, and knowingly, dishonestly, accused me of engaging in Eurocentric racist rhetoric. He knows that I'm
I
not.
didn't say racist. I just said Eurocentric. There's a big difference between that. I think you think
When you accuse me of engaging in white man's burden, you're saying I'm doing something racist.
No, the difference between us is I don't scream racism for everything.
I've never called you racist, not once in this whole discussion.
Please stop. No, I'm not saying that your argument was racist. I'm saying it was Eurocentric. And the reason I say that is because in your mind, we're in this like super late stage capitalism system.
Using
But I
the
think-
white man's burden, that's
wait,
racist.
but I think
No, you can't
please
lie to me.
Please let me finish my
You
point.
can't talk past this.
My point is
You
if you're-
can't lie to me,
Stop.
buddy.
All right,
Apologize.
Irishladdie, please stop. My point is if you're
Acknowledge that you called me racist for no reason
Irishladdie,
other than to
please
defend
shut up.
your implementation
Okay.
of slave shops. In
No, oh god, I almost forgot my point. Thank you. Hold on. No, my point is that if you're anywhere else in the world, not in Europe and not in the U.S., and you look around, it doesn't feel like late stage capitalism. It feels like there's so much room for industrialization.
Yeah, I know.
So much
We
room
already
for
acknowledged
so
this
much
point.
room.
It's
So
irrelevant
you
to
think
the current point,
we're in
which is
late
that
stage
you are
capitalism
higher.
because of where you are now. And
You're squirm. Ooh, you're wriggling. It's like I'm fishing and I've got you and you're so slippery and I'm not wearing those fucking padded gloves you can get to hold on to shit.
Wait,
that's
how? It
slippery,
sounds like
okay?
he's addressing the whole central point of the conversation.
The point he needs to address is that he accused me of making a white man's burden argument.
you did,
One
though. And you
historically,
continue to do that, by the way.
how is what my argument was more white man's burdeny than your argument?
Okay, here, wait. Can I? Let me do this. Let me do this. Because Irishladdie will respond. No, because he's not gonna respond to you. He'll respond to me. Okay, Irishladdie. So what he's saying is that when you have two parties and one is literally helping the other out of the goodness of their heart, and that's it, that type of thing is making it sound like one party is the superior and the other is the inferior there. So when you say that a Western nation has some moral obligation to help a third
They are
world
both
country, it
unbearable.
sounds like you're
No,
talking
you're
about a
the
burden
man
on the
of
larger
destiny.
country to help the smaller one, and it only exists from a moral reason, not because both sides benefit. That's what he's arguing.
I never did.
true.
You asked
I
me
don't-
ways that we could invest in India without engaging in exploitation of their labor, and I provided an example.
Yeah, but
I say that's
when
something they
but the
need.
way that you phrase it, Irishladdie, when you say we should invest in their country, you're making it sound like a way that's only a one-way street. We're throwing money at them to invest in them, and the burden is on us to do it. That's why he's saying that you're making the point.
I feel. Listen, Stephen.
Okay.
Don't you feel that's a little bit disingenuous to equate saying that you want to invest in a developing nation to you invoking a 200-year-old racialized worldview as to the burden of the white man to it? I feel like that's an incredible stretch.
Well,
I'm
so
not
like,
even-
I mean,
I'm
you
not
can
even
argue that
upset
what
about
he's
this
doing
because-
is he's being a little bit incendiary by saying it, which I could agree with that. But I mean, like, I still think that's a contention that you would need to address with maybe without the incendiary language. That like, well, hold on, let's say that we make these socialized nations or whatever, and that people don't necessarily feel that moral burden. Like, how are you going to compel somebody to help someone else other than literally saying, well, we're the better country, so we need to do it? Like,
Wait. It has nothing to do with being better. It has to do with we have more. America's.
okay, stop. You're equivocating. We have more. You're better. You're better.
No, wait, no. I fundamentally disagree with that. The circumstances by which America has led up being wealthy.
Okay, never mind. I don't want to argue this point. Never mind. This is so semantical. Okay, so when I say better, I mean terms like we are better in terms of material conditions and opportunities that we can offer somebody.
Oh yeah, of course America's better in terms of material.
We have to sacrifice to uplift them. That's what you're saying.
No,
I'm not advocating for that. I
was asked to provide an example,
Please let me
and I
talk
gave
without
the
you saying
example.
anything.
But you lie every
Oh my
time
God.
you talk.
I am advocating for a trade that is mutually beneficial. I'm not saying that the U.S. should make sacrifices to uplift other countries. I'm not making that argument. I'm saying the capitalist system is great and that it allows us to both benefit without relying on some
never
sort of
said
like moral
sacrifice.
burden like that. Which
I
is kind
never
of what
said
you-
sacrifice. I never said moral burden.
Right,
I
so we're
never
just-
said
Okay, hold on, wait.
reasonable.
So when
I
you
never said we need-
say invest,
every one of these words is being put in my mouth. I was asked to provide
Okay,
an
yeah,
example.
can I
of
explain?
how
Yeah, can we?
could invest? The investment was presupposed in your question.
You're not.
Stephen,
No.
and
It's
I
no.
answered.
Okay, let me explain where this is coming from. The reason why he says you're making it sound like you have to do a charity sort of thing is because the language that you're using when you say that we need to invest in other countries is you make that sound like a one-sided transaction. That's the implication that you're giving, whether intentional or not intentional. But that's what that's how I'm understanding it. You're essentially saying, and because you are making arguments that you explicitly stated earlier of morality and not necessarily of economics, that's what it feels like you're saying, that we should take some burden onto us in order to invest in other countries. That's what it feels like.
Okay, but you do realize I never out and about said we should or we have to. many socialists are extremely insular and
well, no.
isolationist.
You have to buy. No. You have to buy that, because if you don't buy that, then you totally concede the point that like maybe we'll fuck over third world countries by moving towards the direction that Marx wanted us to, but you just don't give a fuck.
Yeah, but I don't want to because I feel we have a moral obligation. I think we all benefit.
Yeah, and that's
from
what we're
free
discussing.
Exchange. Yes, I
the moral
agree.
obligation.
I feel we all benefit from a free exchange of wealth, of trade, of ideas across personal and national borders. At no point have I made the argument that our willingness or need to do so is racialized, and the invocation of the white man's burden is nothing but a slimy tactic on Exskillsme part to try and distance my the moral legitimacy of my grounds from the argument. It was dishonest. He still can't own up to it, and it's why I can't talk to people like him, because he recognizes, because this is in his head. Oh shit, wait, pretty much all the examples of us investing in free trade in India involve us using sweatshops and really other forms of exploitative
Investing
labor. He could probably
ISNT
think
a
of
one-way
other ways,
street, hope
better
this helps.
ways that we could invest, that we could collaborate with India. Fuck, I better think Eurocentric.
Well, no, the problem is that like every topic that you're bringing up is something that already happens under capitalism. Like there are businesses being moved to other countries. There are marketing agencies that market product to other countries. There's education and two-way investment that goes on in other countries. This is all happening under capitalism already.
I know, and I never said it isn't, but you asked me to provide an example of how we could ethically invest in another country, and I gave an example. I never said anything beyond that, not a moral obligation, not that this is something that only happens under socialism. It's something that I think would happen more under socialism.
I guess it's just strange. Like it seems the moral obligation. When you mention that we should invest in another country but not do it in an exploitative way, you're essentially saying that we should do it as an act of charity, which makes it sound like you're doing it under a moral obligation.
No, you can have non-exploitative trade, or at least less exploitative. A socialist America would still be way more economically powerful than most nations on the planet, possibly all nations on the planet, excluding a big few. There would still be some implicit coercion in the trade deals that we negotiate. We'd still have more bargaining power, but that doesn't change the fact that under socialism, there are means by which, because we've removed capital as an incentive for the business owners, we could invest more often, more ethically, less exploitatively, more globally.
I mean, I don't know what to say other than that's just fundamentally not true. And if you can point to,
Wait, which
like
part
one social
source.
What was that?
Wait, what do you mean? What part of that was fundamentally not true?
How he's just saying we can invest more ethically without capital, but capital is fundamental to investment. I mean, I guess the problem I have is he's just saying, oh no, we can just do it better without like saying how. And
no, okay, fine.
But this kind of circles because he already admitted earlier that he doesn't know how. He's kind of just saying.
Wait, no, I never said I don't know how. I said I don't understand the minutia of global trade. I apologize. That's not my forte. It's not even minutia.
It's not even broad strokes. It's like you're saying, oh, we in a socialist country we can invest more ethically and we can invest better and everybody will be better off.
I can't accept this from somebody who keeps pretending that I'm saying a socialist revolution would cause us to no longer be able to engage in global trade. You've ascribed every conceivable negative value to my argument.
Wait, can I give an example, and then you both can say if you agree or disagree with it? Okay, because
absolutely.
Okay, so let me give a hypothetical because I do believe,
I don't like hypotheticals.
No. I mean like a hypothetical thing for you to you can tell me whether or not you would agree or disagree with some of this. So like, let's say that we talk about trade with other countries. So I do fall on the side of I believe that some of the trade that we engage with, even if it's beneficial to countries, feels a little bit scummy, right? What if we establish something where it was something along the lines of, if we're going to engage in trade with you, or more specifically, if we're going to export a supply chain to your country and your laborers are going to work in that factory, the only way we will consider doing this under some international agreement is if your employees make enough money to, say, afford housing and food, and then we would set some baseline for that. Is this something, so Irishladdie, is this a type of policy that you would be okay with?
A great step in the right direction.
Okay, and then Exskillsme, is this a type of policy that you would be okay with?
The problem is I'm not allowed to go to the minutia of the economics, right?
Well, no, go to the economics. I'm curious. What would you say? Yeah.
What we observe empirically is that when we make those sorts of arrangements, they're always unilaterally. We always have to make those sorts of arrangements with a specific country.
Sure.
And when we do make them with a country, guess where the suppliers go? They go to the country where we didn't make that sort of arrangement.
Okay, wait.
Wait.
Oh yeah.
Stop.
Okay.
This is especially a big problem with with Asia because we've made these very same agreements with Cambodia, but then the production just.
Yep, I agree. The reason why I want to cut this off is because unilaterally is boring. So for another example of this is sometimes we've tariffed certain countries for like I know it's happened specifically with tires and whatnot in the past, but what happens is people just buy from a different country, right?
Right, that's why I don't like hypotheticals.
So, yeah, but we can do multilateral. We can do multilateral trade agreements. Things like the WTO or the TPP would allow.
They cheat on multilateral, especially in the Asian countries. They don't respect them. So whichever country cheats,
capitalists sure do hate paying people a fair wage.
Whichever country cheats in such an agreement is the one that gets the benefits. We see this empirically. This isn't me making this up.
But couldn't we use multilateral trade organizations to punish these types of behaviors?
Yeah, even with multilateral, they still cheat. They just haven't been. But even like this is even beyond like the scope of what I'm arguing. If that works and we can make it multilateral and make it not cheat and it does more good than harm, then like fine. But the problem here is Irishladdie has multiple times said that he advocates a paradigm shift. So we can say that these things are a step in the right direction, but I'm talking more fundamentally about the idea that we're not even close to ready, or we shouldn't even think about replacing the global capitalist system.
I like how Exskillsme is trying to defend capitalism, and he's like, we just can't force people to follow. My point is that you're doing Irishladdie ethically. What do we do?
My point is we're doing Irishladdie such a huge charity because he's advocating for abolishing capital, and we're talking about in this ideal
hypothetical scenario,
capital. Would this be an improvement? Yeah, abolishing private ownership. You said abolishing private. Right. So you want to abolish private ownership of capital, and that's basically the same thing. So the problem I have, Bessie, is you have these. Stop. You have this hypothetical where it's like, what if like in this ideal hypothetical scenario, this could improve things? Would you suggest that? It's like, well, sure, but I don't want to say that I'm finding common ground with Irishladdie because he's still advocating for abolishing the entire paradigm. So that's not like I don't consider that any sort of middle ground at all. I don't find any value from that hypothetical.
I just can't get over the fact that you think that abolishing capital and abolishing private ownership of the means of production are the same thing.
Well, when you abolish private ownership, capital tends to disappear, and we've seen that everywhere. Okay, hey, I'll name me a socialist country, and I'll name you a socialist country.
I'm not a tanky. I don't defend the socialist experiments that have taken place in the past. I think they were ill-advised.
Of course, you don't defend them because they objectively resulted in horrible outcomes. That's why you don't.
Of course. You did it. You found out why I don't defend them.
I know why.
I care about.
Of course, I know why you defend them.
I don't just mindlessly stick to my ideological.
You're just saying, oh no, when we abolish private ownership of capital, we'll still have just as much capital as before.
Okay, so here I'll point to an example. Irishladdie, I'm sorry, Exskillsme. So what about in Venezuela before they went hardcore fucking price controls and shit? It seems like they nationalized their oil industry, and for the most part, for a few decades, I believe that ran pretty successfully. No?
I mean, I think they were definitely benefited from the oil prices. I don't know it ran successfully. I mean, I think the fact that the economy wasn't robust to the sort of downturn they had means that kind of success is relative. Maybe it seemed successful at the time, but in the grand scheme of things, it was a house of cards, right? I think you would agree with that.
Well, I mean, like, I don't know if that's necessarily fair because couldn't you criticize a lot of OPEC-related countries for having their industries heavily dominated by like single resources or whatever?
But which ones look like Venezuela now because of current oil prices?
Well, but I don't think that Venezuela's current problem is because of like current oil prices. I think it's because the government went. The government went hardcore overboard on price controls and basically kicked every fucking company out of their country as a result of that. But before that happened, it seemed like I want to say it was 79. It might have been earlier than that. It seemed like they had largely nationalized their oil industry, and that seemed to work pretty well. Like the country was pretty successful in terms of economics and whatnot.
Yeah, and this is like kind of one also broader point is that part of the reason why capitalism is such a great system is because it's like so robust to these sorts of interferences. Like, yeah, you can have like a huge degree of non-capitalist aspects within a capitalist system, and not everything's going to go to shit. And so you compare this like the socialist societies, where with every socialist society that's failed, some socialists will have an excuse for why it did and how, that wasn't really socialism. Whereas with capitalism, I recognize that you can nationalize industry in a capitalist society, and the society is not going to totally collapse. I recognize.
How many times? Hey, chat. Let's do fucking Simon Says. Simon Says, raise your hand if you've heard a capitalist say, "Hey, that was corporatism." Everyone fucking defends the failures on their side. Quit being so goddamn dishonest.
Well, but I think what Exskillsme's response to that is that even though there can be capital failures, or there can be failures in society related to capitalism, when they happen in a socialist society, they tend to be wholly destructive. They don't have the same robustness to survive it.
There are reasons why socialist societies have failed in the past, and I can list quite a few of them. I'm not a big fan of most of them. There have been some positive aspects of socialist societies and of nationalization of industry in the past, but I don't want to argue them with Brainlet over here because he'll just say, "Oh, well, last time I checked, American GDP is still higher." And so,
you're not understanding my broader point. I
wasn't the fuck done.
No, you're not understanding my broader point.
There are plenty of reasons why socialist societies have failed in the past. They have been poorly timed. They have been led by populists and despots. They have failed to collaborate well with their neighbors in regards to trade and like military endeavors. But a big one, a real big one, and I'm not saying this is all of it, but it's definitely a big part, is that America undermines foreign socialist governments at every available opportunity, because America recognizes what you... What? No. What I'm saying right now is a fucking fact. I don't care if you don't like it. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable.
Yeah, you have an
but a
excuse
large
why
part of the reason why...
I understand it. Yeah, you have an excuse. It was just special time.
I have explanations. And part of the
AKA
explanation is because America interferes in the development of socialist
right.
nations.
Here's my point. Here's my point, is that for every socialist country that fails, you have an excuse for saying that. But capitalism is robust. So we can have large degrees of socialism. We can nationalize an industry or two, and capitalism is still going to be okay. Another probably good example of this is like Scandinavia.
There are plenty of
Hey, shut the fuck up. Let me finish. My point is that you have a country like Scandinavia also, which has like a very robust welfare system. So you could say, well, like, oh, well, look, that's not very capitalist, but it seems to do well. Part of the reason why I advocate for capitalism is because it's like a very flexible framework, and that you could have different aspects of different systems, and not everything's gonna go to shit. Whereas with socialism, socialism, everything invariably does go to shit, and then they'll just blame one special thing. In case Irishladdie is blaming the U.S., but like with capitalist society, it's so
telling to me that you're literally incapable of making a statement without invoking dishonesty. Because I never said as an excuse, I said it as an explanation.
Right?
I think countries. Yeah, because there are differences. I don't defend these countries. That makes my explanations as to why they failed just that, explanations. I'm not trying to invoke them as positive examples, but you have to paint it that way because you can't stop lying. You can't stop being dishonest. You can't stop wiggling your way out of points. I never said capitalism wasn't robust. What?
Name one thing I'm lying. I never said you said that. Name one thing I'm lying about.
The unfair equivocation of an excuse and a explanation, acting as though my interest in the socialist revolution was in some way motivated by Eurocentrism, arguing that I was invoking a white man's burden argument, suggesting that there is no difference between the abolition of capital and the abolition of private ownership of capital. I mean, do you want me to go on? You have mishandled every.
First of all, none of those are lies. Those are just arguments and rebuttals. That's not a lie.
They're not rebuttals. They're straw men, which is a form of lying. I'm sorry, my dude, my friend Arino, I cannot argue with a person who lies to my face and pretends he has not done so. This is why I can't. You're not. This is it's really frustrating for me, and I'm speaking to chat here, not to you. I know you don't sympathize with my frustrations, but hey, chat. I acknowledge that there are problems with socialism, with its implementation, with its practitioners, with the nations who have attempted it in the past. I think that there are good reasons why they failed. I think in many cases their failure was justified. I want to learn from those failures. I want to find ways to implement those systems that seem so ethical in theory, in a more pragmatic sense. I want to build the world up. I don't want to look at the world as it is and excuse its worst aspects.
Yeah, you want to be a central planner. You want to build from the world down.
You want
to do the white man's burden of we're going to organize society.
This is incredible.
Because
are we recording this? Central ownership, not something I advocate.
I said central planning, and that's all you've advocated.
No, don't agree with that.
So wait, you don't agree with planning? Well, if there's, how are we going to?
Wait, do I not agree with planning at all?
How are we going to organize the economy?
Like I plan my grocery list before I go outside.
How are we going to organize?
Central plan? No, I don't agree with central planning.
So you don't agree with central planning, and you don't agree with markets.
No, I don't agree with central planning.
How do we organize labor and productivity without planning and without markets?
There are markets. I'm a market socialist. I'm an anarcho-syndicalist. I believe in markets.
But you don't believe in private ownership of the means of production.
No!
And markets. It's such a meme. And to chat, to be fair, zero economists are market socialists. It's not even. I have a degree in economics. It's not even brought up because it's a meme. It's a joke.
You know, Marx.
So
it's especially rich seeing somebody who admits he knows nothing about international trade. He knows nothing about economics.
One of the most influential
amazing that somebody you know nothing about any of this thing, but you invoke the word market and how you describe your ideology. It's especially rich because you know nothing about markets. So calling yourself a market socialist,
I do. I don't know much about international.
It's hilarious.
International interest rate.
It's hilarious that you use the word market to describe your ideology when you don't know the first thing about markets. That's all I have to say.
Do you want to talk about markets? I'd be more than happy to talk about ways to. Oh, okay. I mean, it sounds to me like you're kind of scared to discuss this market, but
I'm not scared.
You know, if you don't think you can duke it out with me.
The only advantage you have is that market socialism wasn't in my curriculum, but that's only because of how big of a joke it is. you're like the worst middle ground too, because at least other socialists have the honesty to admit that, like, okay, I hate markets, whereas you know that, like,
okay, wait, no,
efficient.
I need you to answer this. This is very important to me, okay? This is existentially important to me. You realize that a major part of leftist economic philosophy involves the inclusion of markets, right?
The inclusion of markets as they define
to the same extent that we enjoy today.
No, absolutely.
Like
no, markets necessarily entail private ownership, and you can't have a market.
No, they.
No, you're totally wrong.
I can't.
Okay.
Hold on, wait a second. Can I budge in here since you guys are incapable of talking to one another? Why is it that I couldn't have like a collection of firms that are all owned by the workers that still engage in markets the same way that firms owned by capitalists would? Why is that not possible?
Yeah, I'm very happy to answer that question. So markets are fundamentally driven by the laws of supply and demand.
Okay.
So fundamental to the actual functioning of a market is the price signal.
Okay.
That's why we say it's the market price.
Sure.
So when you have a market price, you have a supply, and you have suppliers that are responding, that have ownership of their capital, and they're responding to the movements in the price in order for supply and demand to what we say clear, which means that there are no surpluses or shortages.
Yep.
What ends up happening invariably in a socialist country, which is what you have in Venezuela, which also was that sort of like market socialism flavor, was that what ends up happening is you have a socialist plan that fixes prices, which it has to do in order to achieve its social goals.
I understand that, but let's say we do the market socialism and we get away from a planned economy, okay? So let's say that you have like a demand, we start to see that there's a demand for more cell phones or something in a society. Why couldn't a collection of laborers get together, open a plant, and respond to that demand in the same way that a capitalist would opening a firm?
They can under a capitalist system as well. The problem is who's gonna invest in that factory?
Well, all the laborers would, I guess, right? Would be the.
But you know as well as I do that even a substantial collection of laborers can't invest in a factory. You need outside investment.
Wait.
So wait. Sorry, but we're wrong.
Oh wait, I haven't answered the question because I'm an actual.
Well, okay, actually, I'm actually curious. Okay, Irishladdie. So let's say 50 people decided that they wanted to open a cell phone plant or whatever, but that is true. The average like cell phone plant worker isn't going to have the capital to invest in this to do it. How would they do that? How would they respond to that?
Yeah, okay, so I admit the theory on this is pretty expansive and I don't know all of it, but as I understand it, the way you would address this problem would be that a large amount of social capital would be diverted to what are essentially publicly owned investment firms, democratically run.
Central planning, dude. You just told me you don't believe in central planning. That is central planning, dude.
Okay, it's no more central planning than investment firms.
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay, wait. Can I just real quick? So the reason why Exskillsme is saying this is central planning is because in a capitalist system, these firms would open and close based on market demand. That's what makes it market-oriented or capitalist-oriented. But you're making it sound like you would basically have social planners, which would make it a planned market, a planned economy. No?
The difference, as I understand it, would be essentially these publicly run investment firms. They would be communes of democratically elected representatives who would do their best to represent the artistic and economic needs of their people, would have cases brought to them, say, I have a phenomenal idea for breakfast cereal. Here is a test product that I have produced using funds that I got from a lesser grant. Do you like this test cereal? I would like to see it being produced in factories.
This sounds like a plan.
You told me you don't believe in central planning. What you're describing central planning.
Yeah, this sounds exactly like central planning. Like, I don't understand.
This is not how central... I'm sorry. Okay, this could be a confusion of terms.
You support central
planning. Wait, calm down.
Exskillsme, shut the fuck up.
He accused me of lying. He says he doesn't support central planning. He just supports...
Maybe we think of different things about what central planning is. Well, but like seriously, I don't know what you would think central planning is, because this sounds like central planning. If a publicly owned firm deciding which products make it to market or not, this sounds like a planned economy.
Let's clarify what we think of by central planning and central economy, because when I think of it, I think of a USSR style, a set of unelected party representatives determine the needs of the people.
Whether it's elected or not doesn't make it planned or unplanned, right? It's whether or not market forces are dictating something or some central body is dictating something, no?
Well, they would, because ideally, when these products hit the market, the funding that they receive to continue production would be modified by what is viewed to be public demand. In that way, the market forces would still determine which products are being made, but rather than profit being the direct incentive, rather it would be the interest that would fuel the profit in a capitalist system. Essentially, the same system is being reproduced, with the exception that it is A, more democratically responsible, and B, it does not entail exploitation of the worker. I think this is a fairly clean solution. It's now, admittedly, mostly theoretical. It hasn't been implemented to the degree that I would like to see it implemented, but I think that theory-wise, it holds up pretty well.
No, it doesn't hold up well
market
at all.
socialism was
About
traded
markets.
with both
Markets
capitalist
don't work
and
by
socialist
votes
powers
in a boardroom for which product should we
successfully,
get
and was a
at best,
far better
that best
economic model than what existed before or after
supports
in
the
the
artistic
region
bent of the community. Markets fundamentally work different than that. So don't tell me that, oh, I'm market socialist, I don't support central planning, when obviously you don't support markets. What you're describing aren't markets.
Well, and actually, let me actually ask a specific example to that, Irishladdie. So Henry Ford, I think, I don't know if this is a real quote or not, but is famously quoted as saying, if I would have given people what they wanted, I would have given them a faster horse, right?
Oh, yeah,
Let's say you have like a
exactly.
truly innovative product. It seems like something like this would never necessarily make it past any type of planning committee or whatever, because maybe they wouldn't see the need for it. Or even something like what Elon Musk does, arguably, as much as I fucking hate him, but like electronic cars and whatnot. Like or electric cars, like maybe these would make
With the
it.
greatest respect, I strongly disagree with that assertion. There have been massive leaps forward in technologies that would later become integrated into public goods, fueled almost entirely by public research, by military research. What happens most of the time, as I understand it, is that the technology, the real groundwork, the innovation, is laid forward often by the government, and then corporations run in to make it smooth, aesthetic, slap a shiny sticker on it, and sell it at the price that they can afford.
But to take one step back here, tying everything together, you say you support market socialism. I'm saying that's not markets, because fundamentally markets are an act of distributing capital and distributing labor to determine the optimal production of goods. And the fundamental thing is that markets do that, whereas you're advocating that that be done by like a vote of some governing body, which technically isn't a government. You said it's a non-government or non-elected body. So my problem with you calling yourself a market socialism is that you don't support using markets to determine the distribution or the allocation of goods and services, or the allocation
Except the
of production.
popularity of those goods, aka the demand, would be the critical factor in determining the prolonged success of any initiative run.
I guess the big difference is
I'm sorry if you don't like it. It is a market. It's a different kind of market, but it is a market. It is the market that would exist under market socialism.
It's a market where the market forces don't actually dictate the allocation.
Okay, well, we've got demand, a factor being taken into account when you determine where and how much and for how long these goods are being produced, and you have supply, that which is coming out of the I don't know. It sounds pretty much.
The fundamental problem with this though is like the exact sort of like weird shortages and surpluses that like we saw in the Soviet Union, where you would have like violin stores up the wazoo, but you wouldn't have toilet paper. The problem is you have no way of comparing across different consumers.
Wait, how exactly? Can you explain to me how the system
Because comparing the popularity of a roll of toilet paper to a violin is impossible. They're fundamentally different things.
Yeah, which is why different workers' communes would handle those requests. Obviously, basic needs and stipulations would be handled by a
cross comparison. How do you decide what labor to allocate to each in a vote? You can't do that. What's elegant about the market is that it's merely market forces and price signaling that determines where the allocation should be.
For one, don't pretend that we don't experience frequent market shortages in poor areas, that they don't get the resources we need. That's why food deserts is a massive sociological problem, one the free market is not prepared to fix as of this moment. And for two, we wouldn't see we would not see shortages in that regard, because things pertaining to basic needs would be allocated on an extremely, let's say, generous basis. See, that's the thing. That's the reason why socialism can work now, the way it couldn't work a century ago. We live in an era of surplus. There's enough wealth and labor power in this country to ensure the needs of every American, probably everyone on Earth, can be met. We just need to reallocate the resources as they exist. It's not as though a socialist society would run into a gridlock.
Okay,
we need to perfectly refine labor allocation or people will be starving.
I know you're trying to escape this topic, but the issue I have is you're trying to claim that your theoretical system is responsive to demand. I'm telling you that like gauging the popularity with some polling and taking some vote is not responsive to demand. Because what goes into determining the optimum level of production is not simply demand. Demand is only one side of the equation. The supply side is extremely important. And a committee of people deciding what's most popular is completely divorced from actually being sensitive to changes in supply and demand. And that's why Soviet-style socialism failed. So let's talk about a specific. Stop, has been tried and it has failed already. So you can't say you don't know how it works in the real world.
We're talking. No. Okay, for the 13th time, I do not defend the invocation of socialism.
They tried what you're saying.
For no reason other than because you're too stupid to understand the nuances involved. But in this example, I'm providing. Why don't you explain to me? Let's talk about a specific, okay? Let's you want to talk about a market failure that might happen under socialism, or I'm sorry, a quote unquote market failure. Let's talk about a specific example, okay?
Between a market failure and then just not having markets, not having a level of production.
We'll go into hypothetical market failure. Go for it. Let's hear it.
Yeah, let's talk about a social failure. Can you provide for me an example of the system I've proposed failing to meet the needs of a consumer population? And I'll do my best to respond. I could have no answer. This is theoretical ground.
What you're describing, so basically there's a committee that determines how much to produce of some good or service.
There is a committee that is responsible for the allocation of capital to people interested in building up their product or their service.
Wait, so I'm confused. How do they even decide though?
Well, ideally, the cases would be brought before them. And these, by the way, this is not like one national council. This is very much a striated bureaucratic initiative. But like I said, if you have a breakfast cereal you want to propose, you come up with a product, you get yourself a fancy name, you test market it. With your
so
friends,
basically, it's Shark Tank, like for all sorts of.
Yeah, no, essentially, yes.
Okay.
It is. And I mean, that is kind of a little bit clunky, but the system as it exists now, which is you better have some starting capital or you better be willing to put yourself deep in debt. And if your idea doesn't work, then you are fucked, boyo. That system's also a little bit clunky.
To be clear, what happens if your idea doesn't work under your system? Nobody loses any money, right? Everybody is just as well off. Nobody suffers from a bad investment under your paradigm.
Well, there's the opportunity cost with them investing in like a shitty breakfast.
What incentive is there to actually be optimal if you don't get any profit from making the best?
Okay, this might be the fundamental difference between you and I, but I believe society can function without people being led around by the nose the promise of a second car in their garage.
To be clear to everybody, because you're beating around the bush, you think society can function without profit motive?
Yeah, unquestionably.
There seems to be, based on what I've seen, there seems to be some like very unintuitive data that supports this idea that people, once their basic financial needs are met, aren't necessarily like highly incentivized by.
That's not unintuitive at all. That's totally intuitive, Steven.
Yeah, it's unintuitive to me. Well, because it kind of makes it sound like you're saying that, well, without a big profit motive, people would never start businesses or do anything.
It's diminishing marginal utility to consumption.
Sure. Well, so then what Irishladdie is saying is that in an economy where everybody's basic needs are pretty much met, we would still have people innovating and starting businesses because these are things that they would enjoy doing on their own merits, not necessarily for profit.
People still care about art. People still.
The problem is people aren't incentivized. People aren't incentivized to make optimal choices. You have to understand that, right? So when you're talking about outcomes, like how much we're producing.
Yeah.
Wait.
Okay. I understand.
This whole argument started with you saying people are incentivized to make optimal choices for their personal well-being. So that is a pretty big fucking jump from you, buddy. But for two, nobody under any circumstance is optimized.
Repeat that. What are you saying?
This conversation began with you arguing that people are optimized to make the best possible personal choices for themselves, and that's why capitalism is good, because it gives
people act in their interests, right? And capitalism works best with that.
But now you just say people aren't optimized to act in their own personal interest.
No, do you really think me explaining diminishing marginal utility is actually making the argument you just said?
You just said verbatim, people aren't optimized to make
I didn't. I said under your system, what incentive is there for suppliers to make optimum, or for investors that matter, to make optimum decisions? There is no. You admit there is no incentive for them to make an optimum.
There absolutely is. When did I admit that?
Well, then
before I answer, I need you to tell me when I admitted that.
Okay, well, you
Can
admitted.
someone find a mod, a timestamp, perhaps, or will Exskillsme get the brief thrill and the blood?
To be clear, you acknowledge that there's no profit motive in making optimal investment decisions.
There is a social
right?
benefit which exists outside the profit motive.
Okay, so there's no profit motive. So you expect investors and people to vote to make optimal decisions with no profit motive. And I take huge issue with that. I think that was an irresponsible statement, Destiny. There is zero evidence to support that if you remove profit motive, investors and suppliers will make optimal production.
So not investors and suppliers, but the study that I'm familiar with that's oft quoted is the one where if you give employees complex tasks, providing them greater financial incentives doesn't seem to incentivize them to make better decisions or to solve these tasks in better ways. It seems like because of the diminished marginal utility that you spoke of, this doesn't incentivize people in the way that we might expect that it would to make better decisions.
That's why I have such a big issue, because we're talking about diminishing marginal utility.
Sure. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Actually making like optimal investment.
So what you're saying is that like in a market, that two competing firms, the more efficient firm will survive because that's how markets work. They'll be able to save money, charge less to their customers, or pay more to their employees, et cetera, because they're more efficient. What Irishladdie is saying is that this same burden of economic costs would be accounted for in some sort of public deliberation where some company would, or not some company, but some elected body of workers would make a decision between two competing firms and then shut down the least efficient one. That's what I think he's saying.
I don't know if he's saying that. So when you say
that is essentially what.
So they're not motivated by profit to make optimal production decisions. So when they're wrong, what happens? They make a horrible investment. What incentive do they have not to make that?
Well, the incentive would be you'd be held accountable via voting. Like people would vote you out.
What does that mean? What happens?
You would be voted out.
Incentives. Wait, there are multiple incentives. For one, and I know that capitalists have a hard time understanding this, I think people generally like doing good to their community and to their fellow, to their comrades. So, for one, there is the inclination towards doing good to society. For two, there is the benefit of social accolades that would come with making good decisions. If there is a production board that is constantly cranking out fucking phenomenal investments, buddy,
joke, dude. Social accolades in replace of price incentives and price.
Oh shit, buddy. The only reason price incentive works on an individual level is because money makes people able to be more free and buy cool things, okay? Which is good because it allegedly makes them happier. There are other ways to make people happy outside of money. Social accolades make people happy. Doing good unto your community makes people happy. These are genuine incentives. They aren't like
Take my free sub, you
It didn't work.
bastard.
You're gonna have an excuse for why it didn't work in the Soviet Union, but it didn't work. Hasn't worked anywhere. It's been tried, to be clear.
Okay, no, wait. For one, the idea that it hasn't.
Worked in Cuba.
For one, the idea that
didn't work in Chile. It hasn't worked anywhere. Not in a single place.
Excuse me. For one, the idea that it hasn't worked anywhere is flatly wrong.
I shot this guy like fucking
buddy,
20
I'm here
times.
for
How
my
the fuck did this guy not die? I shot him like 7 times.
Do you really want to get into, say, for example, Cuba and how well they've done with healthcare, literary education for absolutely no
Their economy is stuck in the 1950s.
Oh, but I'm not talking. Yeah, no, their economy has a big old problem, but there are instances in their economy of success which outstrips our own. What? I never said, buddy. My dude, can you please go a few minutes without being dishonest with me? Because I read it.
You said there are huge examples of economic success. There's not. Every economy that's tried it, that your whole social accolades will be enough to incentivize optimal decision making.
Okay, no. How about we argue that? Can we argue this on the theory, my dude?
You can say it will work. I'll say it doesn't work, and I have more evidence for why it doesn't work than you have evidence for it does work. So I don't understand.
Listen, society has been human society has been functioning for a long time. Longer than profit has existed as an incentive. There are plenty of examples in the past of people trying to do good unto their community, motivated by nothing more than that which we all should be motivated by. Doing good.
Economic growth is a capitalist phenomenon. Economic growth
is a capitalist phenomenon. So economies have never grown in history in non-capitalist society.
Let me show you a link. You want to look at world GDP over time?
Yeah, GDP is a capitalist metric for determining the production and wealth of a nation.
Pop quiz. What does GDP measure?
The total value of all goods and services within an economy.
Yeah, produced in a country in a given year.
Who determines value?
What's a better way of measuring economic growth than the amount of goods and services produced by an economy?
There's the average like per capita of
per capita
individual in a country?
No, because that's risen too. You don't want to use that argument. Don't do that.
Yeah.
No. It has. Wait, I never denied that capitalism is great for growing the economy. The assertion that capitalism is the only economic system that can lead to economic growth is fucking
the only
stupid.
one that has so far. So you're just saying,
wait. Then how did we grow?
You have no evidence for it.
Wait, what brought us from hunter-gatherers to like the height of the Holy Roman Empire?
Farming.
Like, okay, I think it was a little bit more than farming, but even if it was just farming, you realize that the Roman Empire, you realize that the Byzantine Empire, you realize that the feudal Chinese Empire and feudal Japan, you realize these were non-capitalist countries that rose to ascension because they grew economically, right? You realize that GDP is a metric that functions well for determining the wealth within a nation in a capitalist system. But outside that system, it's every bit as useless and contextual as GDP per capita would be to a Byzantinian.
It's
such an empty and fallacious way of arguing against the potential for economic growth outside of capitalism.
Here's the problem I have, Irishladdie, is you're proposing all of these like really lofty ideas of like, oh hey, we're gonna have a system of central planning where people are voted in and they determine, and there's no profit motive involved, and it could work. Well, I can say no, it won't work. And
okay, fine. Okay, here's my genius counter. If you wanna bring a product to market now, you need to go to an investment firm. You need to get investment. You'll be in debt if your thing doesn't succeed. You're going to be in debt for the rest of your life. And
well, firstly, that's not how investment works. Careful.
Okay, there are plenty of small businesses that have been floated either on the spare change in the back pockets of those owners, or by putting yourself into pretty big debt with the banks.
If you want to open
lawless system of promoting like local.
Well, yeah, I'm just saying that if you procure investment from other people, that generally means you're personally not going to be massively in debt. Hopefully, right? Because you're getting investment from other people.
Hey, Stephen, if you have a second, you should open the Google link to show economic growth, because I think people also have this misconception. I think I've heard you repeat this too, Stephen. Economic growth isn't like an inevitable. I think a lot of people say like, oh yeah, we have great standards of living now, but we would have had this today without capitalism. But
I don't
really,
I don't agree with that statement.
But okay, hold on, wait, real quick. Let me. So what Irishladdie is trying to say, I think, is the problem with using, if we're talking about capitalism versus any other type of system, we'll say socialism or communism even, using a term like GDP or GDP per capita is always going to favor capitalism because that metric is inherent to capitalism. So for example, let's say we could create a society of Buddhist monks who are all eternally happy and are all self-actualized and go out to the fields every day and meditate. The GDP per capita of this society might be really, really low, but in other metrics, we could argue that the overall happiness of the society is much greater. So I think that's Irishladdie's contention with saying that GDP is the best way to measure the success of an economy or the success of a country, when capitalism also has other baked-in flaws like massive consumerism.
That's totally valid. That's totally valid. I'm just asking him for a better metric. I'm asking for a better metric, or one that's at least that good.
Wait. You realize that the concept of GDP didn't emerge until well after capitalism had begun to seize.
Well, okay, wait. So what would a better? So ignoring this, what would be a better metric then? A better way.
Well, in a market socialist economy, GDP.
Well, okay, but what Exskillsme is saying is that GDP is, or what I imagine Exskillsme is saying is that GDP is always going to optimally grow when you're responding to market incentives. That's like a really basic, predictable thing. But a planned economy...
Yes, absolutely. But we are not, listen, this is what Marx wrote about. We are not slaves to capital. We should not force ourselves into lives.
Okay, wait, hold on. You're saying we're not slaves to capital, but you just told me that the best way to grow an economy or to measure growth is with GDP, which would argue that we should be.
The best way to grow an economy is to be capitalist and to do everything in your power, whether it be ethical or not, to raise them fucking numbers. I don't think that's the best way to run a society. I think that capital should serve us, not the other way around. If the economy is growing, but there are homeless in the street, if there are fucking single mothers out there that can't afford to pay for their children's.
Stop pontificating. We know your spiel. We know your stump speech here.
Yeah. Well, wait. It's not a stump speech. It's a list of the problems with your system. Wait. So I have to listen to you.
So hey, which non-capitalist society doesn't suffer from homelessness?
Why do you keep asking? Wait. Why do you keep
because
asking
you're attributing these problems to capitalism, while capitalism has done a better job of alleviating these issues than any other system. So if you're going to attribute homelessness to capitalism, then I'm asking you, Where in the world do we not have those problems without capitalism? That's it.
I don't know why you keep pretending that I am defending any other existing socialist system. I don't know why you keep.
Okay, so hold on, wait, real quick. Oh my God, because you guys are talking past each other again. So Irishladdie, you just brought up a bunch of ways.
Destiny, please. I just need to say one thing. I am not talking past him. I address his points directly.
Well, but you're not, because the point, the way to address his point directly, the way you address the point is what you're giving is a list of things that you value. But Exskillsme saying he values them too. He just feels like your system doesn't address those things better than his does. So, for instance, you're saying things like, I want to do things that are inherent to capitalism, like single mothers or people that are homeless, et cetera, et cetera. And Exskillsme is saying
inherent to capitalism.
Okay, well, I'm sorry, more or less, it's yes, you would say that too. Also, you would say that things like homelessness and what. But regardless of the specificity, he's saying that he values the same values, but that your framework doesn't deliver you a better solution that comports to those values. That's
exactly.
Why
it does not.
Yeah, right. And that is why I talked about, at your behest, Destiny, the implementation of how we might partner up and trade in India in a socialist society.
Okay.
How we might invest in burgeoning industries and socialism. But what am I supposed to say? I'm be like, hey, here's some problems with socialism. We've got homelessness, wealth inequality. We've got fucking medical bills and shit. And then he's like, okay, why don't you say how they'd work in a socialist society? And I could, but how many hours am I meant to dedicate to a counterexample for every flaw he has to cover up in order for his argument to make sense?
It's not a flaw, Irishladdie. What I'm saying is that what you claim to care about, empirically, capitalism is better at alleviating the issues that you're identifying more than any other system we know of. So if you're advocating for a system that introduces a paradigm shift away from what is working really well now, then you should have some broad stroke understanding of how we're going to sustain things like the current arrangement of international trade.
I'm not interested in sustaining its current arrangement.
I know, but you know who's going to be hurt by that? The people who are going to be hurt by that are the less developed countries, the people you claim to care about.
We've already been over this. This is
you're right. We have, but you keep introducing the same problem with your argument. What you claim to care about,
this argument,
what you claim to care about, is best under capitalism. With the issues you claim to care about, empirically, the best outcomes happen under capitalism, and you keep coming up with these pie in the sky ideas.
So let me clarify this. Listen. Wait. We can settle this right now, actually, because I think we're both, tiring of this somewhat. I certainly am. Can I make any arguments for socialism to you without there having already been a super successful socialist country that's better in America in every conceivable way?
Of course, I think the way, kind of like what Destiny was getting at, there are market failures in capitalism. I'm not an anarcho-capitalist. I do think there is a role for government to act as an umpire. There are aspects that you could consider socialism. So, for example, maybe
I'm not. No. You're talking past the point. You're talking past the point. You're answering something nobody asked, my dude. I'm not asking for ways the government can step in to make capitalism nicer.
Let me finish to answer your question.
You're not answering my question. You're just
question. My answer to you is, if you're able to explain within economic paradigm how some solution you have works, then I'll be open to it. But nothing you are proposing is at all derived. It's totally divorced from economic theory in all ways. There's no relation of it to economic theory. So if you want to convince me of any facet of socialism being applicable, there needs to be grounded economic arguments. To get back to Destiny's example, or we were talking earlier about like minimum wage, if you can show me that there is monopsony in the market and that there's market failure because laborers are underpaid, then I would be open to socialist-esque price controls.
And how exactly could I suggest to you a better way of addressing some of the problems in capitalism without you then saying, haha, but it's never happened in real life, got the libtard again?
Again, an example of this is you can still explain within, I'll give you an example. It's like we've never had like a global free trade like agreement before, but I can justify that stance but within economic grounds. I can explain to you how like some sort of global free trade agreement would be massively beneficial. And you could say that like, oh, well, we've never done this before. How would you know it works? And I could say, well, look at the economics. Like the economics support the idea. The issue we have is that your ideas are, again, divorced from economics. So it's hard for you to convince me of your ideas because
they're not divorced from economics.
Can I bridge?
No.
Can I bridge you two? Because this is what I would like to see as somebody that is easily more left leaning than Exskillsme and easily more right leaning than Irishladdie. Something that I would very much enjoy is seeing socialist experiments done under a capitalist paradigm. So if people want to start like workers co-ops or whatever, if those types of businesses were to start in the United States and they became like ubiquitous, if like every single successful successful business was like a worker co-op, that would be something that would cause me to step back and go like, okay, wow, hold on, like this is actually like immensely.
Can I address that point? The problem is, for one, there have been successful co-ops in this country. Many of them. I shop almost exclusively at one. But shut up.
I have nothing against them.
But with that said, there is no way for a co-op to succeed economically in a way that would put it at par with other economic forces. And that's your idea, because socialism is aiming to be ethical over profitable.
How would you deal then with on the global stage? And maybe this is unfair. Maybe you would just hand wave this and say with a world government or something. What would you do then if you as a country had to compete against another country that was capitalist then, that constantly
That's an excellent question. I'm so glad that I'm being posited actual questions instead of dipshit capitalist fucking wanking.
Okay, just answer the question.
Okay, well, it's a really tough one. The problem is capitalist nations historically have used their superior economic leverage to muscle in on neighboring socialist nations. I mean, America is like the #1 like socialist stomper.
Yeah, so how do we not let that happen?
Well, I would like to think that America has enough of a standing economy and enough of a standing military to ensure a safe transition to a point where we would be sustainable economically. We still have enough, not only labor power, but enough wealth within our nations to ideally to argue for favorable trade deals with our current trade partners, India, China, European Union, South America, and what have you. And hopefully that goodwill, along with the pre-existing civil society in this country, which is heavily like a huge part of global culture. Like America is one of the foundational aspects of global culture. So I think all of these factors mixed together make us Americans in a relatively safe position to transition to socialism, free from external harassment. Now that applies only to us.
But he's not just talking about harassment. That's what you fundamentally don't understand.
I understand literally whatever you're about to say.
What you conflate, Irishladdie, is harassment.
Destiny, I think that was a decent.
Oh my God, can you mute him, Destiny? Like what you're conflating, Irishladdie, is you're conflating harassment and competition. We're not just talking about harassment. But if the U.S. transitioned to a socialist economy and China didn't, and by your own admission, there are all these inefficiencies within the socialist paradigm, how is the U.S. going to compete with China? It's not a matter of China harassing us. It's just a matter of them being more productive because they have a capitalist system.
Yeah, they can be more productive. They have like, what, 1.7 billion?
Okay, so then what you talk about is an issue then. Yeah, it's not harassment. We'll still be outcompeted by China. And
yeah, we're going to be outcompeted by China no matter what. They will eventually
that's not necessarily true at all.
Us.
No, that's not true.
No, come on, Destiny, you know that's right. Eventually,
so he would say that's not necessarily true because even though China might have a much larger economy, America has its strengths that China can't necessarily.
I'm sorry, were we not talking about the size of the economy? Because America will still have its strengths under a socialist economy.
Obviously, how would the function of population? So obviously, probably a more.
Okay, then sorry, I misunderstood. We would still have our strengths in a socialist economy. You realize we would still control the majority of the world's most globally recognizable corporations. We would still have enormous access to both an unparalleled amount of intellectual and labor capital. There are huge assets that America can take advantage of, whether or not we're capitalist.
It will not when all of that is under the ownership of elected laymen who are
never said they are under
investment decisions for social praise and not for profit.
My dude, that's some classism you just hit me with right there. Who the fuck said laymen?
You said democratically elected. I mean,
yeah. For the workers' boards and the elected. No. You're mischaracterizing me. If you cared about making your point, you wouldn't argue against a straw man. You would make sure you understand what I believe, and you would argue against that. I never said that everything would be run by elected representatives in the society.
They would decide the investments, right? Like they would decide what to make the investments. So you talk about all of these things. They talk about all of these things that America has that are the result of our capitalist system, and you're just taking it for granted that they're going to exist in the same state when we abolish private ownership of capital.
Never said they would exist in the same state.
Okay, you're still depending on them to be competitive with China.
Yes, and that's why we would utilize those resources.
Well, I'm glad we clarified that. But you're still depending on something that's a fantasy. The idea that we're going to have all these advantages when we transition to socialism, or
wait, my dude, my good buddy, my friend, my comrade. Okay, how is it a fantasy that if in a capitalist society we have labor power and certain markets open to us, that in a socialist society we wouldn't still have, like, wait, let's just take like a quick example. Google has fucking American campuses right here in our home soil. I don't fucking care about corporations. Google, we nationalize Google. Google still exists, still has them smart brainy boys with those big round heads that are operating all of its intellectual and technological functions. The only difference, the big difference here, is that the absolute metric shit horse ton of money that Google makes is not being funneled into a very, very, very small number of hands. But the production, the technology, it's all still there.
I hate to break it to you. I'm a programmer. Programmers care a shit ton about like status and income. If you live in your
whoa. This is such a vacuous. This is such a vacuous argument. I know this is a vacuous argument. Holy shit! It is.
Listen to me.
No. Please feel free. Yes, please.
You said that when we nationalize Google, they're still going to have all of their brainy people. Again, you're taking that for granted. If you remove the profit motive for them to work in that environment, then you can't guarantee that those people are going to stay there. Some will, maybe because that's their social calling or whatever, but you're just taking it for granted while removing the profit motive for them to actually be there. It's a ridiculous assumption. It's naivety.
I'm talking about hypothetically the largest economic upheaval. I'm talking about hypothetically the largest economic upheaval in human history. Yeah, I am making some stipulations, but I can defend those stipulations with reasonable arguments.
It's not defensible that if you just
it's inconceivable to you. It's unimaginable to you that if we nationalized an industry and the people in that industry were previously used to enjoying like a pretty high wage, it's incomprehensible to you that we might find other ways to incentivize their participation in that industry. You can't fathom it. Your fucking pea-sized neural cortex can't process that neural that's firing from my mouth to your ear to your brain. It can't get through.
Wait, why can't these experiments just take place under a capitalist paradigm first?
If it could, it would happen under a capitalist system. If it could, it would be happening right now.
Wait. No, both of you just said something, with all due respect, Stephen, kind of stupid. For one, Stephen, corporations are economically incentivized to organize themselves in a capitalist system, as in a capitalist manner in a capitalist system. Like we can't. There can be socialist experiments under capitalism, but inevitably they will always get muscled out by competitors that are willing to behave more unethically and pool wealth in the hands of fewer to invest in greater dividends down the line.
It's just more excuses for the empirical.
No, that's a fact.
Wait, and then what was? Wait, I'm sorry, and maybe I totally missed this. So what was your argument if other countries became capitalist and then bullied us out because of our inability to compete on the world stage? How do we deal with that?
I think we have enough social, cultural, economic, and military capital, along with enough positive trade deals that exist currently for us to secure a transition to a socialist economy.
Wait, when you say this, so do you envision the United States becoming then like fully self-sufficient? Like we don't need to trade with other countries? Or?
No, of course we'd still trade, but there would obviously be a period of upheaval during which we would be vulnerable to foreign influence. That's how it's worked in the past with socialist revolutions. I think we have the capital in this country sufficient to insulate ourselves against the worst of that.
Okay, so wait, hold on. I just, without getting into the massive digest, I'm just trying to figure out like exactly how this would work. I'm not trying to get you too much into the minutia, but like we would begin to lose, to quote Trump, like pretty massively. Like our deficit would grow phenomenally. All of that foreign capital, how does it come back to the United States? Are foreign people going to start buying up businesses here? Like how does that money come back to us?
Well, this is the tough part. This is the part I can't talk with Exskillsme because this is where the guns come out. You know.
Wait, so we would have to go to war to enforce our system on other people? Or?
No. Sorry. To clarify, we would not have to go to war with others. We would have to say it politely, incentivize corporations currently stationed in the United States to keep them from fleeing to other nations.
No. Hold on, wait. I just want to nail this point down, okay? Because this is an actual conversation without you guys talking about it, okay? So if we were to bring all of our supply chains back to the United States, stop engaging in foreign trade in the current ways that we do, our products would become...
We wouldn't have to stop that.
You're talking about becoming a fully self-sufficient country. So you're
No, I didn't. I'm very sorry if I implied that. But what I mean to say is during the transition to socialism, there will be a period of economic upheaval that will disrupt our trade relations.
Okay. So let's ignore what I just said then. If we were to focus on ethics over profit or over our economic well-being, eventually other other countries would become much more competitive than us in regards to trade, and it would hurt our export market significantly. When we start to experience the economic pains of that, of not being able to export products to other people and whatnot, what do we just eat those economic losses and hope that we can
He said we confiscate the property, we execute people who don't obey.
Whoa. I mean, I probably will say that, but I haven't said that yet. So
you did say that though. You said
no. We'll get to the explosive finale down the road, okay? Yes, Stephen, one of the unfortunate truths of being a socialist is you have to accept that your nation will not get to enjoy the skyrocket GDP growth that capitalist nations get to enjoy. There is going to be a sacrifice of some economic efficiency to the benefit of hopefully making life better for everybody. Now, does that leave us open to being slowly economically consumed by other nations that don't have our same, ethical standards? Absolutely it does. That's why I'm glad I live in the United States of America with the world's strongest military that could defend itself if necessary. I would like to see a socialist cascade, because and pardon me for dreaming here, but as we go socialist and we no longer exploit developing nations, the socialist movements that have been growing in fervor in those countries since the Soviet Union took rise would hopefully have a little bit more leeway to flex, because they aren't being stymied by American corporations going over there and funding their people to beat them into submission. Hopefully America going socialist would have a cascading effect, and within, I'm going to be optimistic, a century, we could see something comparable in most of the nations of the world. Is it risky? Yes. Are we all going to die anyway? Yes. I think it's worthwhile.
That's a whole
Was that
lot
an answer? I'm not trying to just jerk off.
It's just theory crafting. You might as well be describing like Middle Earth policy or something.
I answered Steven's
question.
No.
So I understand your answer, and this is gonna make you maybe kill yourself. I hope you don't do it on stream. But my issue with this is that this answer, there are so many points at which things could become catastrophic that it's just scary for me to imagine that whole paradigm shift.
Yeah, look, I benefit from the stability of the first world. I'm not just sitting here with my gun in my hands, oh yeah, fucking I'll get to shoot a cop. Yeah, I understand that it'll be scary and difficult, but we are not free of history. History hasn't ended. Society is scary and difficult. There will still be upheavals, revolutions, genocides, natural disasters. We're not free of these perils. And I think that one peril in particular, upcoming, not the inherent immorality of capitalism, but rather global warming, is approaching. And it is so potentially disastrous, so overwhelmingly destructive, that we have to be more accepting of possible alternatives. I do not think this is like a one and done, easy peasy, glorious transition for the people. It is a difficult process, and I will never downplay the suffering it could cause. But I think it's worth it. And I say that neutrally, recognizing that I am as likely to be a casualty as I am to be a victor.
And
or the fact that you advocate for genocide against dissenters.
That's not, nope. That's for one, nope, not centrist, just some people. And for two, it's not genocide. Genocide is socially, economically, well, no, it's not economically based. If it was economically based, it would be a genocide. But it most
I like how you change the definition on the fly.
No, I misspoke.
Well, hold on. I mean, if you were to kill all rich people, that's a type of genocide, right? Does it necessarily have to pertain to race or religion?
Well, I'm not rich, and he said he would kill me, so I'm.
Capitalists and capitalist supporters.
My buddy. Exskillsme, you're a special case. But no, we wouldn't kill all people.
I'm a capitalist. There are a lot of capitalists out there, dude.
Yeah, and we're not going to kill the cap. That'd be ridiculous. We're not going to kill everyone above a certain age.
Don't worry, you and Dan will be on the same train.
I'm not commenting on that one. Look, okay, it's not about killing all the rich people. It is about securing the removal from power for people who could, in the event of a revolution, stifle the will of the people. These are people with enormous political and social and economic power. Not every wealthy person.
But isn't that going to be the Google people who own stock in Google? Aren't you going to be taking it from them too and putting them?
Some people who have stock, like the big stock
holders?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Amazon, they all have a piece.
I agree. I think what Irishladdie said was right. We must secure the existence of our people and a future for our socialist children.
It's so hilarious that
I agree unironically with that statement.
That we'll have a debate that's like okay, PewDiePie recommended this guy. Now he's not a Nazi, but did what he say, what was that crypto fascist? Like that's how sensitive we are.
You want to know what the difference is? Excuse me.
Whereas we have.
You want to know what the difference is? I know you won't be able to recognize the difference because as a capitalist, you're incapable of siding with leftists over fascists. But the differences here are two. For one,
I don't want mass murder on any side.
For one, I can make. All right, when you're done. For one, I can make arguments as to why the people who I think deserve to be removed from society would benefit from their removal.
A Nazi can say the exact same fucking thing.
Yeah, except their arguments fall apart. No,
yeah,
but no, you can't do it. You can't hold it back.
That too, my dude.
That motor mouth, my friend. I can make arguments. Let me clarify that are good.
Yeah, they can.
The same way a revolutionary could talk about how you need to get rid of the monarchy and the noble.
You're saying now on the richest.
I need you to stop just a little bit. The depth of your misunderstanding is embarrassing to me. I'm cringing over here. I'm getting a fucking ab workout cringing at what you're saying.
Capitalists are as much a victim of their
we support mass murder, but we support it for the right reasons. We want to mass murder the right people.
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, hey, here's a question. Wait, let me ask you something.
Members of our community.
You're a feudal peasant.
If they can't be rehabilitated,
because the people in the market square have been talking about capitalism and free trade, and you think, fuck, that sounds a lot better than being a serf to a landowner. Now, how can we establish such a society?
I want a system that gets us to the point where we can upload our consciousness
and probably the religious clergy,
death
or
to
is
another
it
reality,
sitting there
the
saying,
fastest.
"Well, I don't support the implementation of violence. In any case, really, that would be genocide of the nobles."
I care so much about the people in sweatshops that I want to implement a social and
tell me that you would support
system that will kill all dissenters. Omega yikes. Living in a society that tolerates
I'm a liberal. I believe there's a right to
ideas
life, liberty,
while
and
wanting
property.
to
And if there's a
implement
governing
one that
body
is
that is
intolerant to other
infringing upon those
ideas.
rights, then I think there is room for violent resistance. But unfortunately, in this scenario,
cool, I totally agree.
You're the one infringing on the right to life and property, and you're the
Whoa.
I'm not infringing anybody's rights. I'm just working every day, and you would have me killed, and other people like me. So
whoa. Okay, like for real, you realize, like memes aside, you aren't in the demographic that would be like killed, right? You do realize that.
Damn, you're not enough of a capitalist.
Like, no. You told me. I mean, I hope.
Yeah, no. Like I keep saying this. I don't know why. For you, Exskillsme, it would be a matter of pleasure. But for other people,
why do you keep joking like that when he keeps railing you for it?
He does because it's socially acceptable for that kind of rhetoric from Irishladdie. But if a right-leaning person,
yes, they fucking mad because the difference is I actually give a shit about society, and when Nazis joke about genocide, doing it because they hate brown people. That's the difference between me and them, and that's what people like you can never understand because you operate in a value-neutral discourse. It is the big fucking cancer to discussion in the political sphere that has ever happened, mostly since the internet came about. The difference is, my buddy, when I make arguments about genocide, I can say, hey, these people have a huge amount of power, and they can use their power in ways to stifle the will of the masses. They can shut down unions. They can shut down protests. They can buy off lobbyists and politicians. These people, as much as they have a right to life, they're hurting society big time, and they need to go. No, and
the same argument about the way brown people out.
No.
They do make the same arguments. You're making the same arguments they do.
Fascists would say, hey, the Jews control a global conspiracy to replace the white man by having brown and black people breed out with our white women with no data.
They say that they're being replaced, which they are demographically. They are being replaced, and we live in a democratic society.
Do you believe in the difference between a good and a bad argument, or are you so value neutral?
My point is your argument that my advocation for mass murder is okay because I'm advocating for it within the paradigm of oppressors and oppressees. But that's exactly the same thing.
Yeah, the difference is one side is lying and one side isn't. You can't understand this. This is incredible. This is yes, they say it, but they're wrong. That's the.
Well, you're saying they're wrong because it. Hold on. Let me just because Jesus Christ, it's okay when both sides do it because it comports to both sides' values. You're saying that it's wrong when they do it because it doesn't comport with your values, but it does comport with their values, so they say it would be right.
Exactly. Irishladdie, you say that people are being oppressed by people, the nobles in power. I reject that. I don't think it's an oppression.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not even going to try and make that. I can't make that argument with you because you wouldn't understand or agree with.
Yours is the same lofty justification. Destiny's right. It's about different morals, so it's like your standard.
Yeah. Well, but I think that's okay. No. Hold on. You can eat that because it's okay because we've already deemed it in the past okay to like kill massive amounts of people to achieve some end, right? We did that with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, for instance.
Yeah, of course. There's nothing inherently unethical about violence. Now, it's often unethical, but it can be used to serve ethical means. Exskillsme, you believe that violence, that revolution, is acceptable in cases where life, liberty, and your freedom to whatever are being infringed upon. I believe there are other circumstances by which, say, for example, you live under an oppressive or exploitative system. I believe that can justify a violent revolution, which is what I advocate for.
You are advocating...
Wait, hold, please. No, just please. No, I need to construct an entire point before you misunderstand half of it. Okay.
Somebody just like the timer, like, because this is crazy.
Because my points
are really good at.
Listen, no, please, my friend, comrade, brother, listen. Okay, the difference is you have to make arguments as to why your standard as to what constitutes a good point to engage in violent revolution is legitimate. Everyone believes, well, most people believe that at some point a violent revolution is justified. The fucking founding fathers believe that. They believe that if the government should no longer meet the needs of the people, then a violent revolution should be ensured.
Wrong.
Okay, no.
Wait, hold on. Isn't that true that we have the obligation as a people to rise up against our government, against tyranny, all that shit?
Not the needs of the people, to protect the rights of the people, and those rights are based off the philosophy of liberals like John Locke.
Sure.
Okay.
No. Well, it's a good thing they didn't say like.
Let me finish.
You interrupted my point, you jackass.
I did not interrupt. I let you finish every time.
Yes, you did. You said wrong when I said something correct.
Oh my gosh.
You interrupted me. Now let me finish.
So the founding fathers that revolution is justified because when the government doesn't uphold the rights of the people. So my problem with your revolution, just the same problem I have with any sort of fascist revolution, is that both fascism and communism are squarely orthogonal to liberal values, which I think you would agree with. So I do think that violent revolution is justified, but it's
wrong.
To protect liberal values. And you, by admission,
let me make a better argument than whatever dumb shit Irishladdie is going to say about socialism, okay? So I think that like the argument that a lefty would give, or that a progressive would give, is that the reason why violence might be justified in these cases is even if the letter of the law is being followed, insofar as like opportunity and whatnot exists in the United States, the material conditions have become such that they don't truly exist in a free way any longer.
You can't make those arguments with Exskillsme. Like, that's a stipulation you will never grant. And I believe this.
Well, I don't care if he'd grant it or not. I'm just saying that's the argument, rather than talking around each other like that.
And it is. But I'm trying to talk with Exskillsme. Exskillsme. My God. Talk and then Destiny talk. My God, man.
You oppose liberal values, though, so it's not even a question. You're not even saying that you achieve liberalism better. You're saying you oppose liberalism.
Yeah, there are some tenets of liberalism I disagree with.
So you're doing mass murder to destroy liberal institutions.
Holy shit! Listen, my buddy. Listen, Exskillsme. I can't deal with this level of dishonesty. Yeah, fascists and socialists both disagree with aspects of liberalism. Both of them are directions societies in late-stage capitalism tend to take. What does that have to do with the effectiveness or the legitimacy of socialism? They're both different to liberalism? It's like I'm arguing with a fucking child. You have no idea how to combat the ideas that I'm putting forth to you. You're just reciting the same tired dialogue script I hear from
critique of horseshoe theory, but probably the most important thing, communism and fascism.
Nothing I just said invoked horseshoe theory. Or were you saying you're about to invoke it?
I'm not invoking it. I'm saying that I'm not invoking horseshoe theory, but I'm saying where there is a grain of truth is that both communism and fascism are similar in that they're both rejection of liberalism. So
that is factually true.
Yes,
I agree.
So you reject liberalism.
One rejection, I believe, is ethical and the right way forward, and one rejection is, I believe, unethical. Both of them require, through some manner or another, the invocation of violence. As capitalism does too. What are you gonna do?
Yeah. So I mean, I guess getting back to the grain point.
Which was that again?
The point was about how it's socially acceptable for Irishladdie to talk about mass murdering people, but it would be unacceptable for any sort of right-wing people to do it.
Yeah, and I keep trying to explain it, but you don't understand why.
No, the difference is that why the reason why.
No. There's a reason why it actually is. There's an actual reason why people get fucking triggered when they hear right-wingers talk about genocide, but when left-wingers talk about it, they get the benefit of the doubt when it comes to being humorous about it or like kind of playing it off. There's an actual reason. You're too thick to understand it, but it exists.
You're not being humorous. You admit you literally support that, so don't play it off.
Yeah, but I'm also very funny. So both are the case.
Right, but don't lie about being humorous about it. You admitted.
Wait, I never. Are you? I need to know that you realize you're being dishonest right now. I never said it was a joke.
Okay,
I said we get more leeway playing it off like a joke.
You literally support mass murder in your socialist revolution to kill liberals to oppose you or to seize the capital or whatever.
I support violence in a revolution. I support a violent revolution.
Just to be clear,
I wouldn't call it.
You literally support that. I just want to make that clear.
Yes.
Okay.
No, I'm not. I'm not ashamed. I'm not hiding it. I put it up front.
Good,
I believe revolution is how we move away from capitalism. This isn't. See, again, another difference. Fascists will hide behind language. They'll fucking play around with words. They'll try and distance themselves from the realities of their economic system, of their social system, because they know on some level that they're unappealing and in the wrong. I don't need to do that. I'm very upfront with what I believe. I'm honest. If there's one thing you cannot fault me for, and you can't, well, you'll probably try anyway because you're not honest, it's that I'm honest. I'm upfront with what I believe.
I hardly give you points for your honesty because you're supporting a paradigm shift away from the system that empirically has brought the most good to the most amounts of people in world history. And you admit you don't
feudalism at its
you admit you don't understand like fundamental ways of how it's going to shift. You advocate for mass murdering people, including people like me. So I'm not going to give you like any points for being honest about that.
Okay. Well, again, I keep telling you, I don't advocate for killing. I don't advocate for killing people like you. I personally think you should be dead. But I'm not advocating it on a political basis. It's a matter of personal preference on my part. Yeah, but listen, again, also feudalism had brought the most stability and the most wealth and the most just general social benefit to the world at its zenith. At the time feudalism began to get sort of like strangled out in Western Europe, feudalism, that people were making the same arguments for feudalism that you're making now. It's fundamental stability. It's done more for the world than any other system in history. And these arguments are the fundamental arguments of a regressive.
Then we studied economics, and economics led the way to the capitalist system that invented economic growth. Again, I don't think.
Okay. For whoa. No. For one,
you talk about how great feudalism is, but there wasn't worldwide economic growth under feudalism.
Well, there was worldwide social and political development. That's the reason why at the beginning of the feudal era there was a substantially lower population, a much less widely adopted technology, and we did have economics prior to the introduction of capitalism. Mercantilism, sort of the proto-corporatist capitalist miasma that it was enjoyed to be, existed prior to capitalism and implemented many of the economic principles we see in use today. Economics didn't exist before capitalism. The shit you're saying is stupid. It's not even wrong. You're familiar with that term, right? It's not just wrong. It's like it belies ignorance beyond that which can be discussed, to be addressed. But the arguments you make are the arguments are regressive. You can make economic arguments in favor of the efficacy of capitalism. I welcome them. I agree.
The problem is your system is totally incompatible being justified through modern economic theory. I think you recognize that.
No, I don't, because I'm a market socialist, and I agree with the implementation.
You then understand my point. My point is the reason we moved on from mercantilism to capitalism is because we were guided by economic theory.
But and you know what? The reason why we'll move from capitalism to socialism is because we're motivated by human.
Admittedly, you're not motivated by economic theory. Economic theory isn't guiding us with your ideas. It's the crazy ideas and the crazy murderous bent of Irishladdie that's guiding us, not economics.
So wait. You realize
your paradigm shift to the discovery of capitalism.
You realize there's a huge body of leftist economic literature, right? You do realize that one of the most influential economists in the world was Karl Marx.
He was not an economist. He was.
Okay, come on.
He was a political
dude.
Philosopher.
Really?
I don't even know if he would consider himself an economist.
Yeah, he was a philosopher and an economist.
It's a pretty.
No, come on, dude. You're a fucking joke.
But you know that Marx isn't taught at all in curriculum, right?
Yes, because the curriculum we teach is reflective of our values as a society. But there is a substantial body of leftist economic literature out there.
Marx was very influential in political philosophy. He didn't contribute to the actual field of economics. That's why when he studied Marx...
Okay. All right. No.
Is it all the right... Marx was saying.
Like, what am I supposed to say here? Do I just go, like, wrong? Like, I...
Okay, that's fine. Well, then what from modern economic theory that is like in mainstream economics is derived from Marx's contribution to the field? Please tell me. I can tell you like John Maynard Keynes. He was an excellent economist. I can list his contributions to the field.
Yeah. Are you asking
what in modern economic theory did we get from Marx? Because you said Marx contributed most influential. So how did Marx influence actual modern economic theory?
Modern economic theory is like. Well, let me answer. Are you asking me why non-capitalist economists aren't seeing their ideas implemented in a capitalist economy?
No, I'm saying you said Marx
putting that forward?
Okay, wait, so let me, hold on. So like, I think when you think of like an economist generally will publish a paper or will write something that will lead to some sort of economic idea that's either implemented or studied or is a way to model society or makes predictions about society. Any of these things would be like an example of like contributing to like actual economic theory or economic science. But it seems like Marx was more a political philosopher or an economic philosopher, and that he kind of gave us broad strokes, but you don't like get anything of like actual value in terms of like how to analyze the system.
His economic focus was the critique of capitalism. He didn't suggest many alternatives. He was more interested in laying out the groundwork of what would later be called critical theory.
Yeah, but like even in terms of like laying out the groundwork, did Marx ever give like an idea where like once the once the wages of some worker reaches like this level, like you would expect to see this? Like it seems like everything was. I don't know. I could be totally
that is not the only way you can.
I'll give an example. John Maynard Keynes, for example, like did a lot of critiques of capitalism, but at the same time, we have like actual economic ideas.
Do I need to just Google like leftist economic theorists and I can just start reading off names? I don't understand what to do here.
Justify your statement, but you don't have to. We can just move on. But you said he's an influential economist. I want to.
Yeah, he is. Marx is one of the most cited philosophical political theorists in economics.
Right, he's philosophical. I want to make sure people here don't know that economists don't take his economic ideas seriously. He's a political.
Wait. Okay, wait. Hold on. Okay, I need please. I can't because I actually. Sometimes I feel like I'm arguing with a man, and the man has ideas, and sometimes I legitimately feel like you're too stupid to understand what I'm saying. Why are you interrupting me?
You can just plug all these different things. What's your actual point, Irishladdie?
The actual point that I was getting at right there was that sometimes I feel like you're too stupid to understand what I'm saying, and it's very frustrating for me.
That's not actually a point.
No, that's actually an essential point. I think that might actually be the most essential point I've made in this entire conversation, because your fundamental inability to understand things outside the capitalist diaspora is crippling. Your imagination is a closed box. You can't fathom it. It's outside your realm.
I think, unfortunately, I can imagine what would happen if we abandoned capitalism, and it would be.
Listen, when you imagine the abandonment of capitalism, you think of Molotovs being thrown in the street and me personally showing up at your door to deliver a 357 through your brain. And while that would indeed be a part of the transition, that is by no means the entirety of it. Now, listen, if you want to ask, you asked me what contributions have leftist economists made to modern economic theory? Which ones are taken seriously? And I can answer you this. Many of them are taken seriously within the realm of leftist economics, because believe it or not, leftist economics isn't very applicable in a capitalist system.
Okay, we can find common ground. Just admit that Marx isn't influential at all in modern mainstream economic theory. That's all. We can admit and move on.
I'll go halfway with you here. Marx is very uninfluential in the implementation of modern economic theory. So people who discuss or theorize how it would work today in society, the modern sort of discourse there, I would say Marx isn't very relevant to that discussion. I agree with that. Yeah, I mean,
I'm curious. Hold on, Exskillsme. Would you say that in the same way that Adam Smith isn't as well, or?
That's actually a good question. I think that's because I think you could say a lot of stuff evolved from Adam Smith.
Yeah, so like
I would actually put Adam Smith's contributions kind of actually in the more Marx lane, because it was more a political philosophy based. But I think where Adam Smith really was actually like revolutionary was understanding that trade creates value surplus. That like there's actually like a value, a surplus in voluntary trade. So like, I would agree with you that I wouldn't say Adam Smith is like one of the most influential economists to modern economic theory. I would agree with that.
Sure.
But I would say that, like his ideas were influential in developing the field.
And would you? And I'm guessing or hoping, I guess. Would you also say that Marx can offer some insight into how potential failures or pitfalls of capitalism in terms of the material conditions of the working class and possible things that could come from that or whatever? Do you think that there might be some?
Look, he's a political philosopher. I'm definitely I'm open-minded to that political philosophy. The problem is what he's advocating for flies in the face of like such empirical outcomes and like
what am I advocating for?
It's not like we're just kind of humoring a political philosophy idea, which I would be open to. It's the idea that like we're actually at the point where the rubber meets the road.
Sure, and then to be clear, just to be super clear, and I could be wrong because I'm totally, I obviously have not read any of this fucking shit. I don't believe Marx didn't necessarily advocate for anything. No, wasn't all of his stuff more descriptive? That like he believes that this is
right.
Yeah.
Well. Marx even was basically took the idea that like capitalism was a necessary stepping stone to the overarching, end of capitalism. That's kind of why
he wrote Communist Manifesto. He obviously had an agenda, but Capital, the book, his primary contribution to economics, was interested mostly in descriptive critique.
Right. I think even Marx recognized that capitalism was a necessary stepping stone to development. That's why I dislike the idea that like we're at late stage capitalism and we're ready to like go to the next stage when most of the world is.
Wait, what do you mean even Marx? Marx was the first one to propose it. You're acting like leftists just begrudgingly have to accept that concession. No, I think Marx, the sort of primeval socialist, he was the one who first said
a lot of people don't know
capitalism was an essential stepping stone.
Right, but that's kind of the problem I have is that there's so many places where capitalism hasn't taken root yet and hasn't like brought development to that country. So that's part of why I don't like Marx's critique, or I don't think Marx's critique is applicable now, because I don't think we're, and I say I don't think, but I think I can prove empirically quite easily.
You can't prove we're not in late stage capitalism. It is a subjective term, a theory meant to describe a set of conditions. You can't objectively determine anything.
You can't prove it or disprove it. I guess I can acknowledge that.
It can be argued in favor of or against.
I can argue that there's much room for capitalism to improve the economies around the world before we even consider a paradigm shift away from
what if the goal isn't the improvement of the economy, but rather the improvement of human happiness, of society?
I'm not even talking about socialism. I'm talking about like a country where like the economy hasn't grown, but those people have that kind of life that you imagine for them. Because the problem is, I agree with you that there's a fundamentally like a detachment from like economic well-being and some sort of like, however you want to define it, social well-being. The problem is, like, I think with whatever kind of value you decide to select for your social well-being, it's so heavily correlated with economic outcomes that it almost always just makes sense to sort of like optimize broadly for economic growth, while at the same time providing like some responsibility for, some social responsibility. But I don't think
I completely agree with that statement, not even snarkily. I agree that by and large, in developing nations and in nations that do not enjoy the wantons of plenty, that optimizing for economic growth is usually a good substitute for making life better for people. I just think, and this is where we disagree, that we in America have reached the point where that is no longer the case, and you don't agree with that.
Well, I definitely disagree that in America we haven't, but I think even more concretely, I think at like regions of the world, we aren't even close to there. And I think us doing the ascension is going to disrupt their development. And I think that, but again, I think even you acknowledge it would disrupt it and that there's uncertainty. And I think introducing that uncertainty and that disruption is unacceptable because the stakes are so high for the people who haven't reached that level of development yet. But yeah, I do think in the US, no, we aren't even close there yet. But again, that's not even my main argument right now. It's that other countries have to get there.
What really bothers me when I have discussions with people like you is that we can never acknowledge the shared values that we.
Well, no, wait, hold on. That's not true. The problem is you guys share almost every value, but your frameworks are like, you both believe that your frameworks will deliver you like to the totally different areas.
I think we should start this from a value-driven perspective. I mean, if going off what both of us have said, Exskillsme and I both agree that the reason we pursue economic plenty or the reason why we optimize it in society is because it's a good substitute for human happiness. We both agree that we should, generally speaking, work to better the living conditions and well-being of the majority of people in society. We're both interested in improving society as a whole.
Yeah,
and we take a step down from those values. But I feel like, Exskillsme, when I talk to you and when you talk to me, I feel like you think I'm just this gun-toting fucking college dropout revolutionary who's just gunning for the opportunity to line people up against the wall and paint it red.
Well, because both of you feel like you need like a dose of medicine to get over disease, and you see the other person holding a gun at you and saying that it's going to cure you, and that's why neither of you are ever going to agree or think that you're having two totally different conversations. This is my frustration when I do political conversations, that both of you are interpreting reality very differently, so of course it's going to feel like you're talking past each other the entire time.
Yeah, but I can't handle this equivocacy because over the course of this conversation, Exskillsme has lied and misrepresented my position many times, jumping topics. No, come on. You've jumped topics around. You've accused me of being racist. You have in every instance available to you, you have jumped topic to the infallible assertion that I can't advocate for any socialist positions unless I could demonstrate it having already worked on a scale not only efficaciously but incomparable in level to the United States.
Not true either. I just want one that's compatible with modern economic theory. At least even some more heterodox theories. At least an attempt, right? Like, I'm not saying that it has to have been tried before. I think I've already answered this. The example I gave was a global free trade agreement. Even though we haven't tried that before, I would still advocate for that, and I would use economic theory to guide that. My problem with your philosophy isn't just that it hasn't been tried yet, and I disagree with that. It has been tried. It's been tried in a lot of places, and it hasn't worked. But the broader critique is that what you're proposing isn't guided at all by economic theory. That's the bigger problem I have.
Okay, you do realize that the economic theory that has governed the growth of the Western world is the product of a very specific set of ideological principles, right?
I know. I think that's why those principles are important. That's why.
They are important, but they're not everything. A feudalist would say the same thing. They would say the idea, the political philosophy of the divine right, the idea that all political ordinance.
Okay, wait. So let me hold on, because we keep going back to this. So you keep saying that Exskillsme is basically making arguments to hold up the current economic status quo, and you're extracting from that. You're saying, well, feudalists would also make economic arguments to hold up the status quo. If we would have listened to feudalists, we would have never gotten to capitalism. What Exskillsme's contention is that under the era of feudalism, economics was never an actual studied science. So this would be the same as somebody saying, hey, take this SSRI in order to make yourself feel better, or to help with depression and whatnot. And then you going, well, we used to lobotomize people, so why would I listen to any psychologist now? And the response would be, well, psychology is actually a studied science now, not just, some crazy medicine man that's telling you to do random things. I think that distinction is pretty important, that economics is an actual studied science post-feudalism. Yeah, so we have a little bit more insight.
I totally agree. And like social science, it is beholden to the values and biases of the people who formulated it. I mean, Destiny should know this far better than I do.
Well, I understand, but your values are the same. You have the same values right now. You're trying to, I assume, both of you are trying to maximize the economic outcomes for the most amount of people possible.
We do have the same values, but we do have contention on several points. For instance,
which is empirical.
Where you assign the blame is not. For instance, Exskillsme might argue that a person who dropped out of high school never really made it in life and spent the rest of their 68-year-old livelihood working at McDonald's. He might argue that that's a failing of that individual because they made poor choices down the road. It led to poor livelihood.
While you say that, and I could be totally wrong here, this might be a part where I hope I'm not wrong, but what I'm guessing is that if I could demonstrate to Exskillsme, hey, if we, tax whatever amount of people at some rate and we fund some type of after-school program for high schools, we can increase the graduation rate to 98%, and the overall economic outcomes for the countries improves. I think Exskillsme would be on board with something like that. Is that true or not true?
That scene from Arrested Development when they're talking about Buster, and then the camera pans, and he's been sitting there the whole time at the table. But yeah, so I wouldn't say that person is a failure in life. I think the big thing is that economics doesn't really try to attach value judgments to those sorts of things. So no, I wouldn't say somebody that dropped out of high school and worked is a failure.
Okay, but can you acknowledge that many people who share your value system, you capitalists, you would agree many people would label that person as a failure? I mean, that's the entire right wing.
I don't understand your broader point, though.
I'm sorry?
I don't understand your broader point.
Well, for one, I want you to acknowledge that whether or not you personally believe that, the people in your company do, which makes it a viable, position to attack on my side of things.
How you're using that to attack. Some people would consider a high school dropout to be not successful or a failure.
Well, I would consider a society in which anyone is capable of becoming homeless, anyone is capable of spending 60 hours a week working and barely being able to keep the lights on. These, by the way, these outcomes within our system are presently unavoidable. There is no broad social policy which could be implemented under this society that would extend to people the guarantee to livelihood that I think is the baseline minimum for ethical behavior in a modern society. And if that were Exskillsme,
maybe there is a system, maybe there isn't, but I know sure as hell that it's not your system, and that capitalism has a better chance of achieving that system. I don't even necessarily think it's desirable. I'm not sure how I feel about that. Let me give you an example. I think there's a trade-off between the size of a welfare state and the amount of immigration you can accept. So people like Destiny, he's a social democrat kind of at heart, and he wants to create a robust welfare system. But my concern with that is, well, the more robust welfare system we have, the more we have to be careful about sustaining immigration.
This is an argument also that I would, of course, agree with. That if you're incentivizing immigration literally for people to take advantage of a welfare system, this is not a sustainable thing. Yeah, of course.
Exactly. So that's why I say the kind of society that you create, or that you think. I don't know if it's possible. I don't think it's possible, but I just know your system isn't even going to get close to there. It's going to be worse than what we have now.
Okay, you don't know that.
I do.
That's a level of uncharitable.
Capitalism will achieve that society. I don't think it's possible, but I know yours won't. So.
Okay, I mean, I can't argue with your assuredness, mate.
You could if you had some economic theory to defend your statements, but you don't. So it's hard. I acknowledge.
Hi, friend.
Okay, I'm sorry. Could you repeat your last statement?
Yeah, I said you couldn't, but maybe you could. It would help if you had some like economic theory to guide. Like,
okay, you realize there is leftist economic theory. It just doesn't coincide with the principles that capitalist economists.
Yeah.
Wait, what did you just say? What did you just say?
There's astrology.
So you're saying to me, okay, this is a level dishonesty. You can't help it. So you're suggesting to me that any economist who does not subscribe to the principles of capitalism is akin to an astrologist.
No, I'm saying your so-called leftist economists, like our astronomy, any sort of any sort of Marxian-based paradigm of economic theory is astrology. Absolutely.
You realize you're like, this is just anti-intellectualism, right? Have you read substantive like leftist economic literature? I know you haven't.
Well, I think his argument is that no one does.
I read some.
No, yes, people do. Stephen, how am I supposed to argue with somebody who says that the foundational leftist economists on my side of the aisle are just engaging in something akin to astrology?
Well, the problem is that it doesn't seem like any of them make like, or what Exskillsme's assertion is, and what seems to be somewhat true from the little bit of economic literature that I've read, is that we don't usually get like any sort of prescriptive or descriptive statements from leftist economists.
I know what's going on here. I know what's going on here in terms of the comparison to astrology.
Any more people in this discussion?
Look, it's the pauper.
Do you want to take my place?
He's saying that it's not false. That's what he's saying. That's what Exskillsme is saying. He's saying that it's akin to astrology because you can't falsify a Marxist system.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is wrong.
Can. There are plenty of descriptive claims made in leftist economic literature.
Any of the empirical observations are invalid because of some excuse you have for why we can't like look at that society. Like you have an excuse for every day.
No, what you don't know. This is just anti-intellectualism. You've never read these books. You don't know the arguments. You have no idea what they contain. You're blithely dismissing them because they disagree with the fucking 101.
To be fair, you don't know the economics argument.
Into your tiny brain in your econ undergrad. You ever heard the phrase "a little knowledge is a dangerous thing"? Because you are so fucking representative.
Well, you're pretty safe, Irishladdie, on this topic.
The arrogance of a person saying that an economic philosophy that disagrees with them is akin to astrology is fucking beyond me. I'm sorry. Maybe I'm just a little bit too modest for my own good, but I couldn't fathom behaving as stupidly as you have. To say things like that, I would never say anything like that about capitalism.
Stop the fake outrage, Irishladdie.
No, this is legitimately disgusting. I'm surprised. Destiny, can you acknowledge that's an anti-intellectual contention on his part?
It's not a contention. It's just...
You said they're akin to astrology, that they're non-falsifiable, and that they'll just create excuses anytime something in the real world disagrees with them. You don't know any.
I think the problem is that the problem that Exskillsme is running into is the same reason why I usually don't do these kinds of debates, is because it's very frustrating to argue to go back to, I guess, like the very foundational thing, the ideal kind of world that you hold up under the guise of socialism, when I'm not allowed to point to any empirical data whatsoever, which is generally the framework that I like to analyze things, right? When I argue social healthcare, for instance, I don't argue theory. I like to point at empirical data. And it's the same thing with economic outcomes. Like, it's very hard to discuss socialism when every example has a reason to fail. Yeah, I don't know. It's just very difficult.
I'm just really surprised you're implicitly backing his behavior in this argument.
Which behavior?
Anti-intellectual. Please, I'm a leftist. I have plenty of real outrage beating in my chest, okay? Destiny, the amount of dishonesty and anti-intellectualism he has engaged in over the course of this argument far outstrips any I have engaged in. It's actually disgusting. This is antithetical to any kind of...
Okay, I mean, like, to be fair, you told him that you would kill him, like, multiple times in this conversation.
Wait, hold on. Wait. We need to get this out of the way. Is this really a problem for you people?
It's
Okay,
actually,
every single time you say you're
it's not a
joking, you
problem.
then follow it up with
easy
you're being
for me.
serious.
It makes it easy for me to show the average person what you believe. You make it easy. Like, you help me out.
Yeah.
Saying
Wait. Yeah. No. Wait.
actually
Yeah, because I'm not dishonest. I'm super open about what I believe. I'm not hiding anything.
0 points.
Nothing is.
Well, okay,
being
hold on.
leaked.
This is like when Trump says he's honest. That doesn't give you. You don't get points for being honesty if what you're being honest about is abhorrent.
No. I'm not saying I get points for being honest. I'm saying he's being a dishonest shit, and I am not.
Wait, so what do you
Now,
think
I
he's
get
being
points in
dishonest
that
about?
Really? I've been.
Well, no,
I've
just
been
tell me one
making
thing. Because I've been listening to both sides of the
dishonesty.
conversation. So what are you something that you think he's being dishonest about?
He has strawman my views consistently.
Wait. So like, what's one view that you think he's strawman?
Okay. He. Oh man, we're really gonna have to dig back, aren't we?
No, I'm sorry.
mean,
I understand you guys have been talking for a long time, but I'm just curious. Like, what's your impression of something? It doesn't have to be like an exact fucking thing, but like, what's an impression of something you feel like he's strawman?
Here's the impression I've been given.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. For one, I think he has been intellectually dishonest. Intellectual dishonesty is the only way somebody could blithely dismiss an entire field of economics without having
It's
ever
not
read
a
it.
field of economics. It is not a field of economics. Stop saying it.
It objectively is.
It is
I'm sorry if you don't like it. I'm sorry if that hurts your feelings.
Okay,
if
real
you don't
quick,
like
can we
it.
talk? Can we both talk about what we mean when we say field of economics?
Sure.
Yeah.
And
Maybe.
I mean,
Please.
mainstream economic theory. Like,
So yeah,
the
it's
actual-
not mainstream
policy that's
economic
actually
theory.
used
Still,
for world
okay,
guide policy
hey,
and stuff.
you realize that it's called mainstream economic theory because it's a theory of economics, and that there are other theories of economics.
Well, I think when Exskillsme says mainstream economic theory, what he's saying is that like, if you were to spend time studying like Marxist theory, like you're never going to come to any statements that have any value in terms of like what we care about in society. Like you're not going to figure out the solution to any like problems in business. You're not going to like be able to analyze.
Yes,
any...
you would. Destiny, I'm sorry, you would.
Keynes is a good example of somebody who critiqued capitalism, but also introduced actual tools that improved our understanding of economics, and they're used today. So
Yes,
it's like
because there are economic theorists who are like, hey, here are problems with capitalism. Here's how we can fix them within capitalism. And there are economic theorists, the kinds I would agree with, who say capitalism has problems that cannot be addressed from within the system. We must look without. Here are alternative solutions, alternative means of economic organization. Destiny, I'm sorry, these things exist. This isn't the idea. Do you think leftist literature starts and ends at the Red Book?
I guess like when I read through like especially in the research that I did for like immigration and whatnot, and then when I look into like things related to language, I've never seen something like published by like here's like a leftist way that we could fix this problem.
Well, a lot of the reason for that is because there's a huge chilling effect on that kind of academic publishing, because there's absolutely no money or incentive
Sure.
to make economic arguments for something that couldn't be
And like, so
implemented
you
in
might
the
be
system.
100% correct here, and this might be a little irresponsible of me to equate these two, but the arguments you're making are the same arguments that race realists make, where there's a chilling effect on publishing that IQ is inherent to race, that all of academia is slanted in a certain direction, and there's actually a plethora of research. It's just like people don't like to talk about it. Like that's kind of like the same.
That is true, and I concede that. The difference is, though, that research does exist. It's out there, and it can be empirically analyzed, points proven and disproven. I'm not saying that there's some treasure trove of hidden leftist knowledge that would exist were it not for the boot of the capitalist oppressor. I'm saying that it's out there, and it can be read today by you or by me. I'm not going to. I'm going to sleep after this, but it can be done. And while I am willing to admit that, hey, I haven't read it, I mean, that's some dense theory, and I've got video games to play, I would never say something as arrogant as, it's astrology. That's just, like, I don't know, maybe it's because I, like, care about intellectual honesty, or because I, like, envision an American population that isn't so disgustingly...
Just stop it.
What? No, listen. No, I understand that you have a black, crusty, ashen heart that doesn't give a shit about anything other than the idea that you might eventually own a yacht. But I actually care very deeply about some values, and intellectual honesty is really fucking important to me. It really frustrates me, like upsets me. I'm upset when I hear somebody who's never read a body of literature claim it's fundamentally worthless and non-falsifiable. That just hurts.
In terms of economic theory, it is.
I mean falsifiable, not non-falsifiable.
In terms of economic theory, it is, because you say it's going to work, and I can't say, well, it's not really in line with our modern economic theory, and we have all these data points that say it doesn't work, but none of that counts. So
we don't have any data. Hey, wait, name a data point that disproves an argument posited by a leftist economist.
The Soviet Union, which is a data point that you've cited to support some of your socialist argument for how it will work.
Wait. Hey, wait. Can you cite a economic leftist economist who has who's written a book discussing the benefits of the? Oh wait, so you don't know? You're just saying
They're not
shit.
Influential in the field. If I studied astrophysics, I couldn't name you an influential astrologist either. I'm telling you, it's the same thing.
Yeah, the difference is astrology is tautologically nonsensical and relies upon principles which we know to be false, or at least we have literally no reason to believe it's true. However, leftist economists have built a substantial body of work that is taken seriously by many academic schools and is widely regarded, widely sourced by people far more intelligent and learned than you.
Wait, so here's a question. Even something that's like widely held up as like being some of the most concrete, or I guess like theoretical frameworks I've heard. Like, do mainstream economists even take say labor value theory seriously, or?
No, because the labor theory of value is just a lens through which you analyze the ethical relationships in a.
Okay, so when you use statements like this, like ethical relationships, it sounds like you're talking political or economic philosophy, and not necessarily like.
Yeah. Labor theory is a political critique. It's not an economic theory.
Yeah. It's more of a political theory thing than it is an economic thing. I would agree with that. I don't think that's a concession.
The problem is you drive your economic organization around that idea, though.
No, For one, there's nothing wrong with driving economic ideas around a political philosophy. You admit that your economic values are derived from the political philosophy of liberalism. There is no difference there. And for two, there is... trust me, there are economic theories far more substantial than the labor theory of value, upon which the writings of leftist economists are based.
No, I think my support of capitalism is absolutely derived from the economic theory that it works.
Yes. Your support of the system we live in today is built from the writings of people who have been influenced by the system we live in today. You were born into the status quo, you took classes that taught you the values and efficacy of the status quo, and now you argue for the status quo. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's also not a fucking counter-argument to the idea that there are arguments outside your system.
I mean, there are arguments outside my system, but some arguments have more weight or more.
Yes, but you aren't arguing against the specific validity of any arguments. You blithely dismiss an entire field of economics, one of which you are entirely ignorant, one of which I am not currently prepared to have a discussion. But thankfully, you're not either.
You're so defensive of it when you admit you haven't studied it yourself. If you care,
you're pretty offensive of it when you have no idea what it is. Sorry, you're right. My base assumption when I know that very learned people have brought about a widely studied and widely cited field of research that's taken very seriously by some academic professionals that I value, my default assumption is that that field of economics might have value. But you're right, it could be total horseshit, and capitalism could be the only absolute and best divine truth, the means by which we shall ascend from this point and forevermore. And there's nothing outside of that.
I think the data suggests that it is effective enough that we should absolutely maintain it and proliferate it. Capitalism needs to spread more. We need more capitalism, not less.
All right,
I can't. Are the ones that need the most capitalism. And I don't. Your own paradigm. You have to recognize that capitalism is a necessary stepping stone for the countries that haven't even started development yet. I mean,
I've clearly made no grounds in this discussion, but I think to the people listening, I have sufficiently demonstrated the habitual dishonesty, the straw manning, and the anti-intellectualism of the person with which I'm arguing. And I'd like to close.
Ad hominems. I'm sure they play well with your crowd, but any reasonable person doesn't take your outright.
None of you realize none of those are ad homs, right? I'm actually specifically labeling critiques of the way in which you've conducted this debate. Ad homs, an ad hom would be for me to call you stupid, which I think you are, and I am perfectly comfortable making ad homs in this point of the discussion. But I'm gonna say my piece, and then I'm gonna be done with it forever. And you can end with as much. You can fucking let it all out, okay? Just regurgitate that capitalist dogma right into the chat. But before you do, let me finish, please. I think I have demonstrated the habitual dishonesty, propensity to straw manning, and anti-intellectualism of Exskillsme. I confess I'm not that economically learned, but I'm economically learned to understand that the world is not made a better place when you blithely dismiss entire fields of analysis outside that which you're familiar with. It's complicated. There are benefits to capitalism. There are downsides to capitalism. But all I want is the freedom to have that discussion in an open and honest environment, free from people like my present debate partner, who are flatly
I think he would welcome it. I think it's just, and I would too. It's just really hard to argue like theoretical into empirical.
Stephen, if you want to discuss socialism, I will read the literature. I will come up with specific empirical, data-driven solutions to problems posed by socialism, and I will discuss it with you in a manner which is completely devoid of the grandstanding I love to engage in. I would love to do that, but you are an honest actor, and Exskillsme is not. And I know you may feel a little bit closer to him because I am in the call right now, and I am more left than either of you are different from one another. But that doesn't mean you should. That doesn't mean you should lower your standards for what constitutes intellectual honesty. Anyway, to everyone in the chat, I'm fucking closing. I'm fucking signing off my channel, okay? To those in the chat, I made a YouTube channel. I'm putting out a video tomorrow. It's on centrism. It's gonna be dope. And it's gonna, and soon I'll get picked up by Destiny, okay? It'll be under his channel too.
Oh boy.
I'll conclude as well. You can.
And it's called Vaush Video. I have a Discord, but you know what? I don't care about any of that shit. What I care about most is being here, talking with people who disagree with me, because I believe that rigorous intellectual discourse is the means by which we will achieve a brighter future.
Okay, so Irishladdie said something interesting. He acknowledged again that he's not a learned man in economics. And in how many fields, if you're not a learned man in that field, can you advocate for the upheaval or a paradigm shift within that field, especially one that has implications like economics? You can't go to medicine without being a learned man in medicine and advocate for some huge paradigm shift that's not backed by any sort of empirical evidence. It is not even consistent with the understanding or the framework of medicine at the time. You can't go to physics without a basic understanding and advocate for some sort of paradigm shift in that field. Now, economics is definitely a softer science than those other two, but I maintain the same position that you can't just not understand economics while at the same time advocating for a massive paradigm shift in the field. And secondly, and I think this is a really important point, the idea that we're in some late-stage capitalism society is totally Eurocentric. It's based off just the bias, the recency bias of being present in this day and time. The reality is most areas of the world need more capitalism and need more economic growth in order to catch up to other countries. That can only happen with economic freedom and capitalism, large degrees of economic freedom and free trade. And it doesn't matter how much somebody pontificates about exploitation. Proof is in the pudding, so to speak, and that the number of people who have been lifted out of capitalism has been about 1 billion in the past 20 years. So basically, I'll just conclude by saying the big problem with all of this is scarcity. And the best system for alleviating scarcity is capitalism and not this socialist theory crafting by Irishladdie. So that's basically it.
Wow, good job. You guys are both beautiful people.